as we've just learned. I'm speaking to you from a slightly snowy Aberfoyle in the Highlands. It's a shame that we can't all be gathered together in one real place, but a virtual place is, I suppose, better than none at all. Now, it's really quite a privilege to be able to kick this live online virtual event and to celebrate 100 objects for the West Highland Museums. I think next year we'll be actually celebrating its 100th anniversary. So these 100 objects are a kind of chart-stopping countdown of the antiques and curios that perhaps capture, I don't know, the essence of the museum and the history of the West Highlands and Loch Arbour. Now, my name is Paul Merton, and I'm the writer and presenter of a series of television programmes usually shown on the BBC, with the name Grand Tours as part of them. Grand Tours of the Scottish Islands, Grand Tours of Scotland, and Grand Tours of Scotland's lochs, and soon to be Grand Tours of Scotland's rivers. Plenty of them around, so hopefully I'll be on your screens for a wee bit longer yet. Now, it is a shame that we're having to do this virtually. We're all scattered to the four corners of the kingdom, but I guess it's only right that we get together in whatever way we can to celebrate the significance of the museum and its social and cultural impact and its magnificent collection, which we'll be examining in detail throughout the course of the afternoon. Now, for me personally, museums have always been a really important part of my life, and they really kindled my own interest in the past and kind of woke my curiosity to other aspects of our own culture, which would otherwise have remained hidden. I grew up on the west coast of Scotland in Argyll, and my parents ran a small hotel there. And during the long holidays, the summer holidays especially, I'd accompany one or other of my parents to Glasgow, where they'd go off to the cash and carry and stock up with dull supplies as far as I was concerned. But they'd drop me off at the Glasgow Kelvin Hall Art Galleries and Museum. And I spent wonderful afternoons there, wandering the galleries, kind of gaping in awe at suits of armour, Native American costumes. And I remember there was an exquisite one with tassels made of the finest buckskin. Seemed to have a bullet hole in it. It used to kind of fascinate me, the story behind that. There were model engines, steam engines, there was scrimshaw, carved walrus tusks, elephants, stuffed elephants, Stone Age graves. There was a dugout canoe, I remember. All kinds of objects that fired my imagination. And then was a wee bit older, my English grandmother took me to London to the British Museum. And I remember standing in a long queue for about 3 hours, waiting to be ushered in to the Tutankhamun exhibition. It would have been about 1974 or something like that. And it was a magnificent and unforgettable exhibition, and it really opened my eyes to the past, to Egypt, and the extraordinary craftsmanship that was millennia old. Now, I'm ashamed to admit that I was a bit of a stranger to the West Highland Museum until almost exactly a year ago, because it would be a year ago tomorrow that I made a trip to Fort William as a kind of research trip and met Chris Robinson. I remember wandering around slightly windswept and wet fort, the old ruined fort at Fort William. And we sought shelter in the museum. And he gave me a kind of a whistle-stop tour. Excuse me, I have to blow my nose. I'm suffering from a slight cold. And he showed me around the Jacobite room in particular, was of special interest to me. And I was just amazed at the breadth and depth of the collection at the museum. It was a veritable cornucopia of delights, if you like. Speaking of which, a cornucopia of delights, we have with us online a panel of experts, much more expert than I, who are going to take us through this 100 list of 100 special objects in our chart. Now, just very quickly, I shall run through their names. We've got Hugh Cheap, who's going to be talking about bagpipes and whiskey, I hope. Ron Cameron on an astonishing handwritten Gaelic dictionary. Hugh Dan McLennan on the Clash of the Ash and Shinty sticks. Got Ian Peter MacDonald on silver cruets, James Johnson on coffin guards, Perrin Westerhoff Nyman on John Brown's Highland garb and accessories. And I remember seeing that in the museum, and it really is fascinating. We've got Paul MacDonald on historically important swords and combat knives, Joe Watson on Bonnie Prince Charlie's waistcoat, Jackie Aitken on Stone Age arrowheads, Chris Robinson on ancient Highland maps and Montrose, the soldier, Kenny McIntosh on the Bard's walking stick, Chelsea Reuter on a prayer book from the battlefield of Culloden, Vanessa Martin on Bronze Age treasure and Jacobite banknotes, and Bess Rhodes on the St Kilda mailboat, which is another fantastic story. Now that's some lineup we've got there. We've got a massive range of objects to get through, but they cover everything from the mythic and the mysterious to the gory and the practical. And I think we're going to hear stories of high romance, high ideals, Jacobitism, treachery, war, religion, death, and presumably a lot more besides. So without any more ado, I think what I should do, because I know we've got a lot to get through, I'll hand you over, having whet your appetite, to Ian Peter MacDonald from the West Highland Museum.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Paul. I'm the chairman. I'm Ian Peter MacDonald. I'm the chairman of the West Highland Museum, and I hope you can all hear me.
I can see you as well.
Because I could get a bit dark if you want. Just to say thank you enormously, Paul, for your thought and words there. And I think we need to extend some thanks to particularly Vanessa for really conceiving the idea of identifying 100 objects and pushing it through, and Alan Little for organizing this very distinct event. And it must be said that this will be an event that will be recorded and we will have access to for years to come. I think it's called the long tail, is it, Alan? So that future generations and the like can actually refer to this. It will be saved on our Facebook page and probably on our website as well in due course. Sorry about the sun attacking us like this. It's a rare commodity in the West, so we're going to make the most of it. I'd also like to thank you all for coming to see us from all over the world. It is unfortunate that we're not together, but it is rather wonderful that we can reach such an enormous diaspora of friends, colleagues, relations, and experts. So this forum does allow that in a way that we probably wouldn't have thought of 1 or 2 years ago. Right, just quickly about the museum. Over the last 10 years, the museum has been transformed. It was founded in 1922 by a small group of enthusiastic, quite well-heeled locals, but it's built now into, and it had a period of some decline, and then over the last 10 years, the great Dr. Chris Robinson suggested that we don't charge for the entrance, and it made an enormous difference. We went from 9,000 visitors to 60,000 visitors in a 10-year period. So it's been a great, energetic success, and it's led by a very good team in particular, with Colleen leading the charge, Vanessa and Sonia making sure the whole energy works. On top of which, we're right at the heart of the community. There's 40 volunteers who get enormous value and give enormous value by joining us through the weeks when we're open. And they help right across from greeting enthusiastically the visitors to helping with the curation as well, and painting walls. I hope you've all seen the new red wall in the Jacobite room, a thing of wonder. Now, we are, as Paul said, celebrating our 100 years next year, and it's a thing of great pride to us. And this 100 objects is very much the initial step of that celebration. We will launch, Vanessa's put together an exhibition of Jacobite portraits, which will hopefully be open in May 22 from the Paninsky collection. That's an exceptional collection, and we'll produce a catalogue with that. I'm particularly proud because all these really thoughtful academic enterprises of that nature does really register as a putting us on the map of value and intellect. So I'm excited by that. We also have the West Highland Museum Second Century C2 project, where we're aiming to establish an entrance to the museum through the High Street. That will hopefully improve visitor numbers. It'll most importantly really improve access so that people can get much more easily to the first floor with a lift that we've got. And having hopefully a good shop on the High Street will also help us sustain long-term income. So we're quite excited about that initiative. Looking back through the old annual reports, when the money was raised in 1925 to buy the building, the British Linen Bank, which is our current home, the money came from Argentina, Calcutta, Sydney, and all over the world. So I'm quite excited to have a slight echo of that in today's activity, today's project. Now, going particularly to the collection itself, which is what today's about. I love that word cornucopia, and it happens, Paul, to be one of the words that we're using to make the statement for our project. Cornucopia and an absolute cabinet of curiosity. It's the most interesting, varied, and I think engaging museum. And we have to make sure that as we develop the museum, we retain those qualities. It's very easy to get all slick and modern. It doesn't come natural to me, but all around me, there is that desire for such. And we will be endeavoring to try and retain as best we can the spirit of what we currently have. I was reminded that Neil MacGregor used to say that every day when he went to the National Gallery, when he was the curator, he used to spend between 10 and 15 minutes looking at a different painting on the way in every morning. And I think by doing so, it gave him a much more profound understanding of the works in the collection. Goodness knows how he ever did that at the British Museum, but nevertheless, when he was at the National Gallery, that's what he did. And we must remember, and the 100 objects identifies this, think of the craftsmanship and the stories and the reasons why these pieces are in this collection. Both the lives that were lived, particularly in this place, and the arguments for and the beliefs of the societies that lived at that time. These are inspirational in themselves. And I think I get slightly irritated, mostly with my wife, because when we go around a museum, I wish to give things time, and she's quite keen to get that cup of coffee. And I do think that we are allowed in an exercise like this to look at things seriously, and how lucky we are today to have such experts on hand. So welcome again, and I hope you all enjoy this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think next myself and Vanessa are going to just talk a little bit of the introduction to the gallery. For my part, I'm from the University of St Andrews, and I'm involved in a wider project called Cupido, which has helped provide resources to this, and also there is funding from the Scottish Funding Council through an innovation voucher facilitated by Interface. So all those people, all those organisations have contributed to this, and for me this is really exciting project, because what we're doing is working with such interesting and important heritage, but we're looking at it from lots of different aspects. And I come from a computer science background, so we're looking at new galleries that work online. International Image Interoperability Framework is something that we're working with, and also by the end of this project, by the time we get to the 100th anniversary, we're hoping to have a good proportion of these objects in 3D digital form for exploration and for use. So, but I think for Vanessa, you've got quite a lot to say about the gallery and the whole process you've been through in terms of, I suppose it must be quite interesting being so familiar with the collections, but then having to choose 100. That must be a pretty hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it was really difficult choosing the 100 objects. We did have help. We decided originally we were going to do this in a book form, but we decided once we were introduced to yourselves that it would be much better to reach for wider audiences if we were able to put this into a digital gallery instead. So we're really grateful for the sort of partnership that we're being able to work in with the Open Virtual Worlds team. But back in 2019, we did ask our visitors that were coming into the museum what they liked about it and to name their favourite objects. We also went online and asked people on social media the same, and we had some really interesting results. There's no surprise, we've done a quick sort of 100 countdown today for a bit of fun, but the top 15 objects in that countdown reflect the objects that visitors decided that they chose, and the number one object basically had more votes than all the other objects combined. It's a very special object. But we did find that our top 3 exhibitions in order of popularity, the Jacobite exhibition, followed by the Commando exhibition, and then the Victoriana collection. So as far as the gallery is concerned, I mean, obviously St Andrews University are doing all the techie stuff. We're providing the information. So myself and a team of volunteers have been collating the metadata for the gallery, writing the narratives. We've had a volunteer who's speaking today, Kenny McIntosh. He's been recording audio for us. We've got other volunteers that are actually speaking in the gallery, that Ron Cameron, for example. Alex Gillespie has been busy for the last 2 years photographing our collection. We're still in the process of doing that, so some of the objects aren't properly photographed yet, but we are getting there. And yeah, and we've got other volunteers helping sort of collect metadata. But I think that's really all I can say about it. I'm just a bit conscious of time because one of our speakers needs to be getting away by 2:30. So would it be safe to go straight into the countdown, Alan?
Just say that this is being recorded. I think it was mentioned before. So if you're not wanting to be seen, you can switch your video off. That's quite an easy thing to do. And also, whilst this is going on, unless you're speaking, try to keep your microphone switched off. Try to be in mute mode, because there's quite a lot of us. But yeah, so let's go.
Oh, Alan, you're on mute.
I feel as though we should have like Top of the Pops music going in the background. That's maybe an oversight, but at number 100, which is a privileged position to be in, we have the Culloden pike and knife, which we're just about to see coming up. So here we have Culloden pike and knife, and at number 99, again, what a fantastic number, panoramic photographs of Princess Margaret's visit to Fort William by Andrew Patton. And at number, this is all online, so you can go to whm100.org and have a look at this in your leisure, if there's stuff here, together with the interpretation which Vanessa has spent so long putting together. But at number 98, we have our first featured object, and it's great to have Hugh Dan McLennan from BBC Scotland here to talk about the Shinty Stick and Ball.
Thank you very much, Fiscal Magus Fazja, to a very warm and sunny Alloa. It'll come as no surprise to anybody that a Shinty stick and a Shinty ball feature in my first selection. Could I just endorse what Ian, Peter and everyone else have been saying about the importance of the museum? I was, incidentally, I've spotted all my fellow school mates who have signed in saying that they know me as Hughie Dan. I can always tell somebody was at school with me because they call me that rather than Hugh Dan. So I've marked their card if any difficult questions come up, and I can stay or will come back for the questions actually. So I was brought up in Coole in Lochaber in the mid-60s. I was born in 1956, so I've nearly been around for half the length of the time of the museum, which is quite scary. And at my stage in life now, I'm looking back on many of the iconic images of Fort William. If we could just stay with the first one, it would be, could we go back to the stick and the ball? It seems to have jumped forward for some reason. But there are many iconic images of Fort William which I retain in my memory, and as I get older, the more they become important to me. And these are things like the Belford Hospital, the Camanachd Cup finals, the Ben race, the King George V Park. My father worked in the aluminium factory, so the aluminium section in the museum was always a great place to explore, because my father would never take me into the factory. But I have a really soft spot for the museum because I spent so much time there. I remember being scared witless by the Taitui, the old Highland house, which was recreated and had quite a scary old lady dressed up in the middle of it. And we always used to have nightmares for a night or two after having been into the museum. So we spent a lot of time there, and I'm delighted that all these things are happening leading up to the centenary. So it is no surprise that I'm going to focus on Shinty, and I'm delighted that one of my former playing colleagues, Kenny McIntosh, is now playing a key role in the museum as well. And I'm going to refer to Kenny as we go forward because of one of the other items. This is beautiful. I'm quite used to being at the bottom of most people's lists, so I don't take offense at being 98 or 99 on anyone's list, never mind this one. So what I thought I would do would be show you something I remember from my childhood. I remember seeing this stick and the ball. They were separate at the time. This is a magnificent photograph by Alec Gillespie, incidentally, in the series he's making. And for me, this stick should be somewhere up in the top 20 of exhibits in the museum, just as a matter of course. I have to leave, so that's what's left me where I am. But it is, in my view, one of the most exquisite and attractive Shinty sticks you will ever find anywhere. I think it is unique in its formation and its beauty. It is a thing of beauty for me, and its arrival in the museum and its provenance is very, very interesting. It arrived in the museum in the mid-20s and was donated by a lady called McLagan from Edinburgh at the time. And the link with all of that is that the stick was, I believe, certainly the stick that her father, Robert McLagan, R.C. McLagan as he was, who published a book called The Games and Diversions of Argyllshire in 1900. And he had a photographic plate in that book as the frontispiece. And I believe that the stick he had in that book in 1900 is this stick that his daughter eventually placed in the West Highland Museum. In the book itself, which is actually available, the text is available online nowadays, you can get it. McLagan tells all about, it's all about the games and diversion. It's what it says in the tin. It's all about what kids played in different parts of Argyll, but specifically on Shinty. What he does when he shows this Shinty and another one is he makes the distinction between the different types of Shinty stick that were used, which were used in Argyll at the time. So I would place this stick, if the book is 1900, you can bet your boots that it's at least 10, if not 20 years older than that. It's in pristine condition. As I said, it's a thing of remarkable beauty, and he provides a description on pages 27 and 28, which I can supply or you can find online, which describes the cass, which is the bent bit at the bottom, the bass, sorry, and the cass, which is the leg or the handle, if you want. Now, the clinching factor for me in terms of identifying the stick is the handle and the design of the wraparound material, because it is absolutely identical to the picture in the book itself. So it's, I suppose it was always said that a Shinty stick should be something like an extension of your arm and used similarly. And I think if anyone was to be allowed to play with this stick, if you couldn't use it properly, you wouldn't be much of a Shinty player. So that's the stick, and I was always fascinated by it, where it came from. what its provenance was, and I'm delighted now that it has such a high profile in the museum. And if we could just refer to the ball there, McLagan refers to the ball being wooden in those days, way back in the 1900s, the early 1900s and before. And what we have here is a genuine example. It's not the wooden ball he shows in the book, but it's a different wooden ball. This one was gifted to the museum in 1982, and it is a wooden shinty ball. It was found in a bog by a character called Donald Ross from a small village called Nosty, which is up in Kintail. And Donald stayed in the mill house in Nosty, and he was digging in the garden one day, and he found this stick, and he kept the ball for years and years. It was beautifully preserved. You find this very often in Ireland, in the peat bogs. They find hare hurling balls, for example. This is the only example of a really old wooden ball that I know that was used in play. So Donald had the history of the wooden balls that they were used in Nosty and Wester Ross in the late 19th century, where Nosty as a village had enough people to have its own team. And the whole history of how the ball became deposited in the museum is a fascinating example of how things can be brought from one area into another, but its significance in terms of the history and the sporting history of the West Highlands is remarkable. And to have these two pieces together, for me, is quite superb, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to explain that. So if we can have a look at the next slide, please. This is a really remarkable story in itself, and this is where Kenny McIntosh comes in to this. This is a Camanachd Cup final runners-up medal from the second ever Camanachd Cup final, which was in 1897. For those of you who don't know, shinty as an organised sport only dates from 1893. The first Camanachd Cup final was in 1896. We know Kingussie won that one, and we have a winner's medal in Kingussie from that match. We had the winners of the 1897 final were Bewley, and we have a winner's medal in Bewley, solid gold. But last year, remarkably, and even more remarkably, I was giving a talk on the history of the shinty stick in Banavie, of all places, last year, and we presented this medal to the museum for safety and its safekeeping. It was played for by one of the players from Bray Lochaber at the time. His name was Huntly MacDonnell, and I'm grateful to Kenny McIntosh for having done a lot of research on who Huntly was. So we know his family history and all the rest of it, where he was from in the Spian and Lochaber area. Now, the importance of the final was it was played at Belfield Park in Inverness. They didn't play at the Bach Park then. But this medal went missing for years and has only surfaced in the last couple of years when a lady in Inverlochy, I play golf with her son, Hughie McMaster, and Hughie said to me, "My mother's got a medal. What will we do with it?" I don't know where she got it. He didn't know the history of it. He didn't know anything about it, but she knew what it was because her late husband played shinty for Kilmallie. So they knew exactly what this medal was. It's a beautiful piece, solid silver inscribed on the back with Huntly's name, the detail. In those days, they never gave them the medal on the day. They would bring them back to a function at some other time and then present them with the medal inscribed with each player's name on it. And I think compared to what they give players who win our senior competitions nowadays, it's still the same shape, still same design, but the quality of these is quite exquisite. And its importance, apart from its connection to Huntly MacDonnell, is that I think it emphasizes the importance of the Bray Lochaber club from the early days of the Camanachd Association through into the 1920s when they contested Camanachd Cup finals and all the major matches. So it's a really, really significant part, not only of shinty's history. It's unique in the sense that I don't know of any other one which exists. I know the Bewley winners medal exists, so we have a winners and a runners up, which is a great thing. But in terms of how we found it, it's interesting. And for me, it begs the question, how many more things like this are lying about in people's homes in Fort William and Lochaber and all the different areas? But for me, The medal, the stick and the ball are exquisite pieces. They don't deserve to be at 98 and 99. I'm not going to labour the point. I'll argue my case some other time. But I hope you enjoy them, and I'm quite happy, as I said, to come back and answer any questions at the end of the talk.
That's great. Thank you so much. And there are some questions for you in the chat, and I'm sure that we will promote the Shinty medal and Shinty sticker, Paul, positions in the top 100 just as soon as we have completed this this event. And at number 96, we have Private Joseph Baker's wartime medals. To be paid respects to what the events that they represent. And our next featured speaker, we have Ian Peter MacDonald returning to talk about Mrs. Ryan's Oil on Canvas by Keith Henderson. What a great painting that is. And it just draws you into Mrs. Ryan, who I would love to have met.
Doesn't she look utterly kind and charming? But I think there's a twinkle there in her eye which suggests that she would be teasing you at the same time. She was Colonel Willie's sister, and Colonel Willie was with was right at the dawn of the Camanachd Association, Hewdan. I think was the second chairman, but I can't quite remember. So Mrs. Ryan was the daughter of the distiller Donald Peter MacDonald, so my great grandfather. So she's my great aunt, and she had studied music across in Germany and in Italy, and had then married a tea planter in Ceylon. But he died quite young, so she came back and got completely involved in this community where she was brought up. She had a number of different languages. She could speak several different languages and was quite conversant in Gaelic, and was very good at telling tales in the positive sense, and very much the storyteller, particularly of local tales. She was described as a dearly loved lady, and will always be remembered for her fascinating wit, which lifted the spirits of all who came in contact with her. Has to be said, that looks very much the case in this portrait. She was one of the very founding members of the museum, and sat with Victor Hodgson as they conceived the idea. And then from 1938 to 1952, she was actually chairman of the museum. So she was very much at the heart of the dawn of the museum. And I suspect, I saw that her brother gave £5 for the initial fund, and I suspect she was quite a generous donator too to the early stage of the museum. She was continually giving her books and her pieces of her own to the collection. Almost every year, if you go through notes, she kept on contributing. She was a friend of Conan Doyle, and she and her husband would invite Conan Doyle up to play. I always like the idea of the famous folk in history treading the same footpaths we do. So that's just one example of the famous who crossed our particular paths. This painting is by a man called Keith Henderson. And Keith Henderson was a very well recognized and well respected artist in that era. A little bit younger. He was born in the 1880s and died, I think, right into the 70s. He lived at Corrahoyley. He lived in Glen Nevis initially, and then at Corrahoyley here in Spean Bridge. Very much the artist. Roddy Campbell talks about the surprise as a 17-year-old going to deliver the painting frames to the 80-year-old Keith Henderson, to find Mr. and Mrs. Henderson lying in the garden, taking the sun completely naked. And this 17-year-old Roddy was quite surprised by this artistic approach, not typical of the West Highlands, as he was understanding. Keith Henderson traveled all very, very widely, all over the world, and was an illustrator of genuine renown through the middle of the 20th century. His fame came off a bit towards the end of it. I suspect this was painted in the 30s or 40s. So an artist of real repute, living in our society. He was awarded the OBE for his contribution to art. He was a member of the Royal Watercolour Society. And he was a great recorder of local scenes. So beautiful pictures of sheep and shepherds, of boys playing. There's a marvelous one of a wee boy playing the pipes. There's a very famous one of walking up in the West Islands. So a great figure. So we're lucky to have both the genius and imagination of Mrs. Ryan illustrated so beautifully by a very well-respected artist who lived in our community.
Thank you so much, Ian. That's fascinating. So the next in our list that we're going to see is Musette from 1986. And then following that, the Poltalach harp. Vanessa, how are you doing?
Yeah, so that's in the countdown. So number 91, we have the Stalker's telescope that was given by King Edward VII in 1909. I think that'll be coming up shortly. Yeah, there we are.
There we go.
And at number 90, we have Snow, Cloud on Sun and Sleet, which is an oil on canvas by John Schuler, who was an American artist, but he had local connections with Malag, just on the west coast here. At 89, we have the Just Whiskey Bottle and Measures. And at number 88, we have Flora MacDonald's Teacup. And at 87, we have Alistair Alistair's Powderhorn, which is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's intricate carving on that.
It certainly is. And then at number 86, we're back to Flora MacDonald. We have a fragment of her dress. And at number 85, we have the West Highland Museum's 1925 catalogue for the Jacobite exhibition. This was a famous exhibition that we had very early at the start of our history, and quite a few of the objects that are included in the gallery were first displayed during that exhibition. Then at number 84, we have October in Neudart, which is one of the newest acquisitions to our collection. At 83, we have some ceremonial spades that commemorate the opening of the West Highland Railway. And then at number 82, we have our next speaker. This is the coffin guard. We're still waiting for the professional photography to be done on this one, but I'd like to introduce you to James Johnson, who's a doctoral researcher at the University of Stirling, and he's going to be talking to you about the coffin guard.
Yeah. I'll just unmute myself. Hi. So yes, making sure that I don't go horribly over time. So I've set a little timer on my phone because I'm that good. So the coffin guard, or the mort safe, you might want to mute that. There we go, thank you. The mort safe here, originally it probably would have had some kind of a metal lid or framework over the top of it. What we're seeing here is effectively a partial coffin guard, and these became quite common in Scotland at the end of the 18th century and into the 1830s. And the two big dates that we have to really remember when we talk about why these things exist are 1751 and 1832. In 1751, the Murder Act is enacted, which effectively restricts where anatomists and people teaching surgery can get their corpses from for dissection, and limits it to the bodies of murderers who are, after their executions, their bodies are either hung in chains for public display or they're donated for scientists to dissect. Unfortunately, between the 1750s and the 19th century, lots fewer people were actually being executed for murder in the UK. Lots more of them were being punished in other ways, which meant that there was a shortage on dead bodies for anatomists. There were anatomy schools in Scotland. There was one in Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and they had to get their corpses from somewhere. So they turned to a loophole, a grey area in the law, which was that technically corpses didn't belong to anybody. They were nobody's property. So if somebody happened to dig up a dead body that was relatively fresh, they didn't take any of the clothes that it was wearing because they did count as property, and they brought that dead body to your anatomy school and it was usable, you could technically buy that dead body without being punished, although you were quite likely to be attacked in public by angry mobs, often involving armed relatives, as was the case in Dublin in 1828, when several shots were fired and one man was nearly killed. All this comes to a head in 1832, after the famous Burke and Hare murders in Edinburgh. They're famous as body snatchers, but they never actually stole a single corpse. They just made 16 of them by asphyxiating people, getting them drunk on whiskey and then choking them to death. They would then sell these bodies to Dr. Robert Knox at the medical school in Edinburgh. A few years after this, in 1832, the Anatomy Act is passed, which restricts where you can get corpses from again. Now your corpse can be donated to medical science after your death, and it can be bought by the medical community as long as your family don't object. So there are lots of examples of this happening. One of the famous ones is Jeremy Bentham down in London, who donated his corpse to medical science, and it's still down there in, I think, University College London. You can go and see it, it's stuffed. But up until then, one of the common issues that a gravedigger, a sexton, and a parish minister might encounter is coming back to the kirk the next morning after a funeral and finding the grave open, the coffin empty, and the deceased vanished. So what do you do to prevent that? You get yourself a mort safe or a coffin lock. You pop it over the coffin, usually for a few weeks until the corpse is so rotted that it's not worth stealing anymore. Then you would reopen the grave, take the coffin safe off the coffin, and you'd be able to reuse it for another burial afterwards. Many of them have little holes and handles in the sides so that you can remove them from the coffin and put it back over another one. There are permanent mort safes. There are lots of examples of those in various graveyards around Scotland and elsewhere, but they were very popular in Scotland. Fun fact, the 1832 Anatomy Act is still technically on the books in Scotland, but it has had some extra restrictions put on it, thank goodness. Okay, I think that's me done. Thank you very much for having me.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thanks, James. Just to say, the reason why this particular mort safe is in the museum is it actually came from Glen Nevis Cemetery, which is just nestles beneath Ben Nevis. So that explains what it's doing with us. Alan, were you going to continue with the countdown, or did you want me to carry on?
I think you're doing such a great job.
Okay, at number 81, we have Lochaber axes and these were from Queen Victoria's visit to Taymouth Castle in 1842. At number 80, we have a child's tartan dress that came from Rochburn, which is quite close to Fort William. At number 79, we have the McFarlane pistols, which they were used in India, but they're actually from a local family here that came back. Number 78, we have an next speaker coming on. I've got down to the, yeah, at number 78, we have our next speaker, and it's Dr. Perrin Westerhoff Nyman from the University of St Andrews and Delhi House University, and she'll be talking about one of the images from our art collection, and this is Walking the Cloth, a watercolour by Jemima Blackburn.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. So this is a painting by Jemima Blackburn, and she was a Scottish artist who became very well known in the latter half of the 19th century and had connections with many members of the Victorian artistic and intellectual elite, including Landseer, Millay, and Ruskin. And this particular work is a local scene showing a group of women walking cloth in Lochaber in about 1870. So walking was an important aspect of cloth production in the Highlands, and it was also a significant social event. And having images of that occasion like this is really, really helpful. I'm a dress and textiles scholar, so it's really useful to have these sorts of contemporary images showing how this would have worked. So walking, which is spelled W-A-U-L-K-I-N-G, something different than walking around. It's the last step in the production of certain types of woolen cloth, including tweed. So some wools are used directly off the loom and they don't get additional finishing processes after being woven. And that leaves them sort of fairly stiff with a visible weave structure. And hard tartan can be an example of that. But other types of woolen cloth go through what's called a fulling process, which softens them and essentially encourages the fluffy fibers on the surface of the wool to bind together, shrinking the fabric and making it tighter and often more waterproof as well. Some wool is fulled so much that the weave structure is actually no longer visible, and this would be a broadcloth. So walking the cloth by hand or by foot is the main pre-industrial means of fulling and finishing cloth. Now in the Highlands and Islands and in places where Scots moved to, such as Nova Scotia and Canada, walking was often accompanied by traditional Gaelic walking songs, which are now being preserved and passed on by heritage groups and craftspeople in a number of different countries. So walking was primarily done by groups of women who would soak the length of cloth and then lay it in a circle. And they would then all sit around it, spaced evenly apart, and sing a walking song to keep a steady rhythm as they thumped the cloth, in this case with mallets, but it could be by hand, and passed it constantly in a circle. The songs that they would sing could be about anything or on any topic, and a few were composed primarily of nonsense words. The key was just to keep a steady beat and pass it consistently. So as the cloth moved around and around and around, being thumped and agitated as it went, the fulling process would take place. So this process is essentially the same as what I'm sure has happened to many of you, has certainly happened to me. If you've accidentally thrown a wool sweater into the washing machine and ended up with kind of a really tight doll-sized garment on the other end. So what's happened is that the hot water and agitation combine to felt the woolen fibers together and cause them to bind and shrink. And the difference is that in walking, the process is monitored and controlled throughout, and a very specific level of fulling and finishing can be achieved by skilled practitioners. And that process can take anywhere from about an hour to the better part of a day, depending on the desired outcome. Now, traditionally, the cloth was soaked in ammonia, usually in the form of stale urine, before being walked. And the ammonia helped to set the dyes and to soften the fibers more quickly. But don't worry, because nowadays, if you go to a walking event or demonstration, the cloth will normally just be soaked in water. So walking by hand was once common across Europe, but it died out in the later 19th and 20th centuries as mechanical methods of fulling cloth replaced the traditional hand labor. But depictions of walking, such as this one, along with preserved knowledge of the traditional songs, is allowing groups of modern day craftspeople to keep the knowledge and skill of this activity alive.
That was great, Perrin. And I want to take this opportunity just to say what a lot of work Perrin put into advertising this event and promoting it, and that's really appreciated by everybody involved. And I think the John Brown Memorial Pin is the next item, after which Vanessa is going to introduce Perrin again. But there's a question there, where could we hear walking songs?
That's a really good question. There are a number of groups doing it in Scotland. I also know of groups in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. I would imagine that in the current situation, there aren't demonstrations, but I know that in normal times they would be doing demonstrations sort of at summer events and that sort of thing. So it would be something that you could find hopefully when the pandemic has ended.
That's great. Thanks, Perrin. So going down to number 76, we have John Brown's Highland dress. And again, we're back to Perrin, who's going to be talking about this.
Great. So we're seeing here a brooch, but it's part of a wider set of accessories that were given by Queen Victoria to her servant and confidant, John Brown. So this consists of a dirk, sword, ski and dew, the large disc brooch that you just saw, and some belts, a couple of other items, all of which are inscribed with the dedication VR, so Victoria Regina, Queen Victoria, to JB, John Brown, 21st March, 1871. And that is the date of Victoria's daughter, Princess Louise's marriage. So these accessories were all part of the formal Highland dress in use in this period, which drew inspiration from the Highland dress of the 17th century, but which had developed to suit 19th century styles and sensibilities. And this set in particular is quite ornate and reflects the occasion for which it was presented. Now, quite a bit has been made of the relationship between Victoria and John Brown, but unfortunately, we don't actually know all of the details. So we can speculate, but we can't be sure. What we do know is that Brown was born in the Highlands as the son of a tenant farmer, and he was working on the Balmoral estate at the time when the royal family leased it in the late 1840s. He attended both Prince Albert and Queen Victoria on expeditions and rides that they took around Balmoral and the surrounding landscape. And after Albert's death in 1861, Victoria returned often to Balmoral, kind of to remind herself of the happy and more casual times that the family had enjoyed there. And through these visits, John Brown became a trusted and favored servant, although apparently he didn't get along very well with the rest of her staff, but he got along very well with Victoria herself. And he was eventually put in charge of leading Victoria's pony when she was out riding, eventually not just at Balmoral, but also at Osborne House and at her other royal residences. So Brown built a friendship with Victoria and became essentially her main confidant, someone who would tell her what was what and who she trusted. We don't know exactly what the nature of their relationship was, as I said, but they were certainly very important to each other. And at the time of John Brown's death, Victoria called him a real friend, which I think is quite telling. Now, a gift of clothing from an employer to a servant, and particularly from a monarch to a servitor, was extremely traditional and time-honored. And we have examples of this throughout the medieval and early modern periods and continuing today. And this had advantages for both people involved. So a gift of clothing, particularly if it was worn for a special occasion, as this set was useful for the wearer, besides being personally meaningful, of course, because it proclaimed high status, favor, and membership of the royal household or circle. And for the giver, for the monarch, it was socially and politically useful to have servants and attendants who were well-dressed and whose appearance reflected the giver's own ideas and values. And in this case, the Highland dress was certainly appropriate because John Brown seems to have worn variations on sort of Victorian style kilt and jacket outfits for most occasions. So this is an extension of what he wore on other occasions. But it was also appropriate for the event itself. John Brown seems to have reminded Victoria of happier times at Balmoral with her own family. So it makes sense that at her daughter's wedding, she might want his appearance to reflect that. In addition, Victoria's daughter Louise was marrying a Scottish aristocrat, the Marquess of Lorne, who was later the 9th Duke of Argyll, who, although born in England, was the heir to a Scottish seat and educated in part in Edinburgh and St. Andrews. One of the goals in such a sort of high status wedding was usually to emphasize the connections between the two families. And Victoria was certainly keen on other occasions to emphasize her own connections to Scotland. So providing such an ornate set of Highland dress to her closest personal servant would certainly have added to this kind of message. So we can be certain that the gift was a thoughtful one and represented a real friendship and care between Victoria and John Brown. But it was likely also thought out to reflect both Victoria's own sensibilities and the specific occasion for which it was first worn. So when looking at gifts of royal clothing, I think it's always really important to unpack the layers both of personal and potentially of diplomatic meaning that they may represent.
That's fascinating, Perrin. Thank you so much. And moving on, we have the Fort William post horn. Not a good day for being a postie down here, I think. It's but that's a great horn. And then we have big Duncan Cameron's dirk. And you wanted to be very respectful of big Duncan when he was carrying his dirk. Letters and News of the Lochside Oil on canvas by Henry Tamworth Wells. And that's a great sweeping picture. You can just imagine how cold that water would be right now. And really pleased to introduce Vanessa Martin, who's going to talk about the silver cache.
Hi, yeah, I'm curator at the museum. Quakes, in case anybody don't know, they were used traditionally by Scots to take a wee dram of whiskey. This is a beautiful silver quake, and it's got a remarkable history behind it, which is why it's been chosen for the gallery. It's engraved, you can't quite see there, but on the right hand side it's actually engraved MC, but you can clearly see the JC on the other side. This is to signify the owners of the quake, who were the Camerons. It's purported to have a very royal history. Engraved on one side, which is sadly out of view in these photographs, it says Prince Charlie 1745, and then on the other side it's engraved with Prince Albert 1847, Queen Victoria 13th of September 1873, and finally Prince of Wales 26th of June 1931. So purportedly, 4 different royals drank from this quake over 3 different centuries. Prince Charles Edward Stuart supposedly drank from it in 1745 during the Jacobite Rising. Prince Albert would have drunk from it on one of his Highland tours. And then Queen Victoria, she actually mentions the drinking from the cup in her Highland journal. So I've got just a small extract here where she talks about her experience. So she says, as we came through Ballachulish, the post boy suddenly stopped and a very respectable, stout-looking old Highlander stepped up to the carriage with a small silver quake, out of which he said Prince Charles had drunk, and also my dearest Albert in 1847, and begged that I would do the same. A table covered with a cloth and with a bottle on it was on the other side of the road. I felt I could hardly refuse, and therefore tasted some whiskey out of it, which delighted the people who were standing around. His name, we have since heard, is W.A. Cameron. So that was Victoria's recollection of drinking from this lovely wee quaich. We are still working on the provenance. The silver marks are very worn, but we are sort of looking to see if we can date it to at least the 18th century. It's a lovely little piece. It's recently been on loan down to the National Museum in Edinburgh, where it was part of their Wild and Majestic exhibition. So we're pleased that it's sort of got out and about from the museum as well to a wider audience. Oops. Oh, you're on mute, Alan.
How big is it, Vanessa?
Sorry, it's tiny. The measurements should be in the gallery there, but I can't quite see them from here.
135 millimeters by 80 millimeters by 35 millimeters. Okay, so it's substantial, but it's not huge. And moving on, next we've got Queen Victoria's riding whip. Okay, and a Fastfern 2-sided seat. So what's that all about, Vanessa?
This is actually embroidered. Supposedly, again, it's the Prince Charles Edward Stuart collection, and he supposedly sat on this seat when he visited Fastfern during the Rising, and it's actually embroidered with the date that he sat on it. So that sits in our Jacobite gallery.
That's great. And Clan Ranald anvil. So we have an anvil coming up next. That's an impressive thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's possibly a meteorite. The only way we can get it tested is to cut a slither out of it, and we're not prepared to do that at this stage. So, but yeah, it's actually on loan to the museum, and it belongs to I've forgotten who it belongs to now. Actually, Chris might be able to say. No, it's not with us.
Okay, well, Arcared Community Council, perhaps. Next, the Sid Shadbolt Commando collection. This, I think, is really popular in the museum, and there's a whole Commando monument near to you as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of sneak preview. The Sid Shadbolt collection came into the museum in October, so it's still in the process of being catalogued at the moment. We have Shirley Wilson, a student from St Andrews University, is in the process of doing that for us. But it will be the basis of a temporary exhibition, hopefully later in the year. So these are just a few objects from that collection. Okay, so yeah, it would be great if you just check your microphones, and if you're not muted, it would be great if you could mute. I know I'm probably the worst person in the world at remembering to do that, but do please mute your microphones. Ian, could you take a look at and then child Highland outfit. That is so cute. Yeah, this is at number 67, and it was from a wee boy on Skye that this belonged to in the 19th century. And then do you want me to carry on? At number 66, we've got Flora MacDonald again. This is her spinning wheel. And then coming in at numbers 65 and 64 respectively, we have charm stones. Sorry, we have the charm stones coming in at number 65, and Professor Hugh Cheap from the University of the Highlands and Islands will be focusing on these objects for us. Oh, sorry, if you could go back, Ian. Sorry, I jumped ahead.
Yes, hello.
Thanks, Hugh. Hi, Hugh.
Okay, yes, hello there. Thank you very much for having me and for giving me a chance to take part in this lineup of people and objects. And this is a charm stone, a charm, I should say. There's a charm stone along with it, isn't it? In some other part of the discussion. But this is a very distinctive charm that is in origin what's called a drift seed, or a tropical seed pod that has come across from South America, the Amazon basin, the Caribbean, the West Indies, on the Atlantic drift, on the Gulf Stream, and had been found on the coasts or west coast of Ireland, in the Hebrides, in north of Scotland, and in Norway, in all these areas that the Gulf Stream visits. And when found on the beach, for example, they were regarded as very exotic objects and thought to be perhaps magic in origin, and so took on the aura of a charm. And in this case, and in several other cases, I've seen several examples, these seed pods have been bound in silver, and sometimes the little silver bands are inscribed, and the little ring on the top so that it could be hung on a chain or hung around your neck and so forth. But most particularly, these charms were associated with protection, and this particular type of charm, the tropical seed, drift seed, another name for them was sea bean, and they were by tradition handed by a midwife to a woman to protect her in childbirth. Now, this particular example is from the collection of the late 19th century folklorist and collector Alexander Carmichael, a very, very famous name in West Highland tradition, and indeed in the collections of the West Highland Museum, his charm collection particularly, and his other items, textiles, weapons, bits of clothing, very, very interesting collection of material that he himself had picked up round the Hebrides, was given by people when he was collecting everywhere from the Uist and Becula and the West Coast, when he was an exciseman. And you can imagine that as an exciseman in the West Coast, he was not best placed to collect these items from people who were hosts. But he did collect them, and his collection is there for us to view today.
Well, thanks very much, Hugh. So going straight in at number 64, we have a handwritten Gaelic dictionary, and Ronald Cameron from the West Highland Museum is going to talk to us about that.
Well, good afternoon, folks. This is a slightly mystery object. It's a Gaelic dictionary in manuscript form. It's all handwritten. It wasn't printed. In 1857, it was acquired by the Reverend MacIntyre of Kilmanevig. He was a local cleric who had been against the disruption in the Church of Scotland, and he inscribed it. It appeared that it had been sold at auction in 1834. It doesn't seem to have been used as a source for other Gaelic dictionaries. Most dictionaries are based on previous dictionaries, and they sort of build up over the years. But there's no attribution to this in either MacLeod and Dwelly's Gaelic Dictionary of MacLeod and Dure's Gaelic Dictionary of 1831, or in Edward Dwelly's Gaelic Dictionary from the early 1900s. It's all handwritten. It must have been an amazing bit of work, putting this together. If I was doing that, I'd make mistakes in every page and have to start again, and I would never get finished. In Derek Thompson's Companion to Gaelic Scotland, he mentions an unpublished Highland Gentleman's Dictionary, which was begun in 1776, about the time of the American Revolution, by a number of clergymen, and there appears to be a copy in the National Library of Scotland. And I wonder if this might be another longhand copy. If there was a number of gentlemen involved in this, maybe they all had their own copy, laboriously written out longhand, a bit like the ancient Bibles. I think this is something that could benefit from a bit of expert attention, people who really do know about Gaelic lexicography, because at the moment we're not entirely certain where it comes from or what its significance is. That's basically what I have to say on it.
Thanks, Ron. We've actually had a PhD researcher contact us in the last week or so to inquire about it. So hopefully that will bring some more research to fruition for us.
Let's hope so.
That's great, because the next object is annular brooches at number 63. That's great. And at number 62, we have John Cameron's Good Luck Charm. So hopefully we'll all share in good luck from that charm. And at number 61, John Cameron Lock of Hair. And very impressive hair it is too. At number 60, Moy Dark Volunteers shoulder belt plate. And I think the Vanessa, you're going to introduce the number 60, number 59, or the speaker for number 59.
At number 59, we have an illicit whiskey still, and we're back to Professor Hugh Cheap, who's going to focus on this object for us.
Well, thank you again. This is a wonderfully exciting object and says so much about Scottish history, Highland culture, all these areas that are so fascinating and very often perhaps lack physical objects with appearances like this, which are so stimulating, so exciting. But this is the whiskey still, a distilling pot and a worm for condensing the distillation, the condensing the liquid that is being boiled off, the steam that is being boiled off by the fire that is underneath the cylinder as we see it. This object, it's rather sad that it's had the side bashed in, so we can't recreate it and start distilling again with it. And I can't help feeling that this was a piece of mischief by the people who found it, the excisemen or even the police, but it was delivered anonymously and by night to the museum in the 1920s, I suppose quite soon after it was open. Somebody wishing to find a home for the still and not wanting just to destroy it, and it found its way into the collection. So there it is, and it's a wonderful object. And of course, it symbolizes so much of Scottish history, the way that fashions in drinking changed, that perhaps whiskey was not the hugely important symbolic drink of the Scots through all history, that apparently in the medieval times we were better on the beer than on the whiskey. And then in the 18th century, 17th and 18th century, there was a very, very strong fashion for wines and brandy and so forth, the spirits that were coming in from the continent. In fact, so popular was wine that you might say in the 18th century that the national drink was a Bordeaux red wine. But this was being overtaken by whiskey in the 18th and 19th century, probably because supply was copious at that time, with these stills all over the Highlands, and attempts by the government to tax them out of existence, and attempts by the government to stamp out distilling when there was an act of parliament which forbade the use of stills with a capacity of less than 100 gallons. So this is obviously one of those. And so distilling was pushed underground, so to speak, into hidden places. And in local tradition, you will find, certainly all around the Highlands, places where it was known that there were distillery, little illicit stills and little home brewing distilleries. And I know myself in Moydart of 3 or 4 places where there were said to be stills. And when you look at the places where there were all sorts of details about the topography and the landscape that allow you to understand how you hid a distilling operation in the middle of nowhere, so to speak.
That's great. Thank you, Hugh. So I'll continue with the countdown then. At number 58, we have the Clan Ranald banner. That's great. And at number 57, we have Lord Lovat's spectacles. And coming in at number 56, we have the Duff Mountain Stretcher, and we're back to Ronald Cameron, who's going to talk a bit about this.
Yes, this is a Duff Mountain Rescue Stretcher. It's on loan to us from the Scottish Mountain Heritage Collection. It was designed by Donald Duff, who had been a surgeon in the Belford Hospital, Fort William, the old Belford, between 1945 and about 58. Now, Duff was born in Edinburgh. He graduated in medicine from Edinburgh University in 1916. He went straight into the Royal Army Medical Corps. He served as a doctor during the Battle of the Somme, which must have been a pretty horrific baptism of medicine for any young doctor. He then won the Military Cross for evacuating casualties from an area under heavy shell fire. He went in, he supervised evacuation. He got the people back to his dugout, and then he went back to check that there were no people left behind. Between the wars, he worked in Wales, and he seems to have been involved in mountain rescue there. He came to Lochaber in 1945, and he started the Lochaber Mountain Rescue Team, which today is one of the busiest mountain rescue teams in the whole of the UK. He trained people in use of stretchers and evacuation from nasty bits of ground. He devised the stretcher himself. He designed the stretcher, which would be easier to use and easier to handle. And in 1953, one of the stretchers was taken on the successful Everest expedition. Now, you may be aware that the Alpine Club deliberately didn't take any Scots on the expedition, didn't take any working class people either. So this is the one Scottish contribution to the 53 Everest expedition. Duff himself is a man of some interesting opinions. He said, we need to take much more exercise and use cars and buses much less. We need to walk and use bicycles. We need to eat much less sugar, and we need to breathe cleaner air. He's certainly a man ahead of his times. And I've got two slightly personal links to it. One, Donald Duff took my tonsils out, and I can still remember the pain. And almost as painful, I remember carrying somebody down, somebody with a broken leg, carrying him down from the CIC hut on a stretcher, very like this. It might even have been the stretcher. There weren't nearly enough of us, and it very nearly broke my back. So I look at this with admiration for Duff and painful memories of my connection. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, we'll sort of move on because I'm conscious of the fact we're running a bit behind time now. So at number 55, we have the Ladies Ben Race Medal. And coming in at number 54, we have AA Cameron's Championship Belt. He was the Lochaber Strongman. And coming in at number 53, we have Prince Charles Edward Stuart's Plaid, or a fragment of. And coming in at 52, we have our next speaker talking about the Glenroy Silver Cruet. We're back to Ian Peter MacDonald.
That's me unmuted. This silver cruet was found in Glenroy they reckon in about 1880, and you may see on the side of it, it says A, and where that's engraved, it's in a beautiful script, and it says A, and that refers to the fact it was for aqua, for water. And in the communion process, you will have one little jug for water and one for the communion wine. And that, of course, would have V written on it. This was made in Ireland in the 1830s, and it was found in the river. Now, as the adhering to Catholicism was greatly discouraged, the priests would travel around the north, and they would quite often say their mass in a particular place on a particular stone. And by 1830 or 1840, we actually had in Glenroy, we had a Catholic priest in resident for some time, since 1720, when a very famous priest called Maester Ian McDougall had come in, and he'd been brought up there, but he came and really worked with the community and stayed, I think, until the 1760s. 1768 was when he died. So he really took Catholicism back to Lochaber in a very committed way, and back to the Braes, back to Glenroy. And that one parish, the single parish of Bray Lochaber, at one time in the 1930s, there were 3 archbishops, a MacDonald, a Campbell, and a Mackintosh, and they'd all come from that one community. We're particularly proud of our saint, St. Mary MacKillop, whose parents were from the Braes, and Catholicism is writ profoundly in Bray Lochaber, and particularly in Glenroy. Now, this stone, there was one particular stone up Glenroy which was known to be used and was known as the Mass Stone. And in the stories, they reckon back to the 1720s. In the 1720s, it appears that Big Ian Moore, Big Ian was walking back from Bray Roy and back to his house in Bahunton. And as he was passing the road at the top that goes down to Cranachan, some ghosts from the bush had said, "You can go no more, Ian Moore." And he said, "Why not?" And they said, "You can't go any further." And then in Gaelic. And then a whole lot of other ones said, "Yes, you can, let him through." And they said, "No, you can't." He said, "Yes, you can." And he said, "Well, look, given that you're both disagreeing, I'll decide to just go on my own anyway." And he got through, but he then phoned up Big Ian, and the priest, Father Ian, and he said, "Maester Ian," and he said, "Can you please come and exercise this particular very dangerous spot, because maybe others aren't as strong as I am." So the priest came up and he conducted a mass on that spot. And somewhat later, in 1879, a lot later, the Cranachan brothers, there were 4 large Cranachan brothers at the time, moved the mast stone. And as it was moved, we think as it was moved, it broke. And the remainder of it was put at the spot where that mast was said. And if you go up Glenroy now, at the very top of the Cranachan Road, you see a substantial rock with a chalice carved on it. And that chalice was carved by D.C. Macpherson, one of our greatest historical figures, and one of the most informed and interested in Lochaber society at that time, who I think went on to become was he the head curator at the National Library, Hugh, something of that nature. So that's the story of the Glenroy Silver Cruet and its reflection on Lochaber's extraordinary Catholic community. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Peeps. So Alan, did you want to continue the countdown, or did you want me to carry on?
Gone for a cigarette break.
I was on mute. I gave up smoking in March 2020, so I'm just coming up to my first year anniversary. I'm enjoying that very much. But yeah, so fire away, please, Vanessa.
Yep, so at number 51, we have a portrait of the Gentle Lochiel of the 1745. And at number 50, we have some pieces of 8 that were from the Spanish Armada that was wrecked from Tobermory Bay, just off the west coast of Scotland here. Following on closely at number 49, we have Queen Mary's seal. And then at number 48, we have examples of Chinese export porcelain, which were made in China for the Scottish market. And they often contained coats of arms of the local clans. At number 47, we have the Breadalbane dirk in the 19th century. And at number 46, we have another part from the Scottish Mountain Heritage Collection, and that's the McInnes ice axe that was designed by Hamish McInnes. And going down to number 45, we're back to another one of our speakers, and this is the Appin murder weapon, and Professor Hugh Cheap will be speaking about this.
Well, this is another wonderfully exciting item, quite a difficult item to make absolute sense of, but of course it commemorates the Appin murder of 1752, which was is one of Scotland's said to be great unsolved mysteries, in that the murder victim was Colin Campbell of Glenure, who was a government factor on the forfeited estates. Those are the estates that were taken away from Jacobite leaders after the defeat at Culloden and the end of the Jacobite War of 1745-46. So these were put under the administration of government appointees. Colin Campbell of Glenure was one of them, in this area of Loch Harbour, and was had the oversight of parts of the Cameron lands in Loch Harbour, and of the Stewart of Appin lands in Appin, that is south of Ballachulish. And this particular day, Colin Campbell had been busy on estate administration in Loch Harbour and was going south to, it was said, evict Stewart tenants on the Appin estates. And this was known about in advance, and it was, the plan was cooked that somebody would try and assassinate him. And indeed he was shot when riding to the south of Ballachulish, riding through the wood of Lettermore, and he was shot in the back by an assassin who was not recognized, no one could be sure of who it was, but and this is said to be in the gun that he shot Colin Campbell of Glenure with. Now, of course, as I've said, that it was this unsolved mystery. Another aspect of the episode was that an arrest was made of a local man, James Stewart of Acharn, and he was brought to trial and he was condemned and executed. And he was tried in Inverera, in the centre of the Campbell Kingdom. The presiding judge was the Duke of Argyll, and the jury was said to be mostly Campbells. So Colin Campbell of Glenure, the murdered man, was said to have got his revenge, so to speak. This all, of course, became the basis of the novel by Robert Louis Stevenson, Kidnapped, 1886. And as I say, the outstanding thing is who was the murderer. And we all love a mystery. And although for most purposes, the murderer has been identified and was known, we preferred to keep the secret warm and the mystery warm. And when I was young, I was given a book called "'Tis Known in Appin" by an English author who described this whole episode and described the mysterious side of it and the mystery about who the murderer was. And he then discloses in the book how he has got to know people in the area of Glencoe and Ballachulish and Loch Harbour, and that the secret is shared with him. And would you believe it, he finishes off the book and he doesn't tell us who the murderer was, and so he doesn't divulge the secret. And it just shows how important these secrets are. Well, so who was the murderer? Well, the chief suspect was Alan Breck Stewart, the hero, one of the heroes of Robert Louis Stevenson, Kidnapped, and was certainly in the area at the time. He was a Jacobite, he'd been at Culloden, and he was a fugitive. And it was thought at the time that he had shot Colin Campbell of Glenure. But Alexander Carmichael, who I've already mentioned, was a gatherer of stories and Gaelic tales in the late 19th century. He got a very good account of the murder of Colin Campbell of Glenure, or at least one of his collectors did, the John Dewar, and he makes it perfectly clear who the murderer was. He was Donald Stewart of Ballachulish, a local man, and he was one of, if you like, a conspiracy of 3 or 4 or 5 people who were going to all try and have a go at Colin Campbell of Glenure, depending on when the right circumstances offered. And it was Donald Stewart of Ballachulish who, it was said, fired the gun. Now, the final twist for me in the tale, and this is still, I suppose, a mystery, but technically speaking, I don't think this could possibly be the Appin murder gun. And here, of course, any further analysis of this weapon is a spoiler for the West Highland Museum. But technically speaking, this is possibly a late 18th or early 19th century Indian matchlock gun, but it shares the characteristics of the murder gun as having a long, very long barrel. And so it certainly looks good, and I do recommend it to you.
Thanks, Hugh. That was really informative. Yeah. Right, so carrying on with our countdown. At number 44, we have a powder horn, which dates from 1698. You go. Sorry, Alan.
I was just going to say that, you know, the horn looks lovely, and there's embroidered postcards from the Great War.
Yeah, that's at number 43. Oh, that's the chap who wrote the postcards, John McCallum, to his wife from the Western Front. He wrote them for 2 years, and we've got a part of the collection came into us 2 years ago. Right, so now we go to our next speaker. At number 42, we have the Loch Tray sword, and Paul MacDonald from MacDonald Armouries is going to be doing a short PowerPoint presentation for us on this. Paul.
Oh, and thank you very much, Vanessa. Thank you for making this happen. It's an honour to present on only a couple of relics that are part of the Kist of Riches to which the West Highland Museum is home. And I shall, I don't need to share my screen, that's fine. So we'll cover a couple of blades in the West Highland Museum of particular historic interest. The Loch Traig sword being the first, of course, Lochaber being a land of martial culture. This is one blade, I think, that tells us a great deal about that. At the start of the presentations here, Paul Merton, who I barely recognised without a hat, had made mention that there would be relics here of that would be mythic and mysterious and gory and practical. And these two blades are all of these in one, it would seem. So can we go to the next slide? Here we have the Loch Traig sword. Now the Loch Traig sword was discovered at Craig Gunnich in the southern side of Loch Traig in 1880, and I'd included a blown up image here of the hilt, and you can see that there's what appears to be a section of the hilt missing, but in closer inspection with break lines and what is not there, the absence of evidence tells us in fact that that section has been lost to a significant impact. And this sword also seems to have been a relic associated with a battle, an interclan battle and dispute that happened there sometime in the 17th century. The basket hilt sword here is of a form, certainly we can date to the mid to late 17th century, I would say. I would put that at maybe mid to late third quarter, we could say, of the 17th century. And of course, interclan disputes were quite rife throughout all Lochaber, throughout all history, we could say as well. But from this particular period and from this particular location, we have coming from a cave at the southern side of Loch Traig, the Loch Traig sword. We'll see the next slide and we'll see an image of Loch Traig itself. It's situated directly to the east of Fort William there. I say it was from the south side that in a cave there, the Loch Traig sword was found. And on the next, we'll have an image that gives something of an idea of the ferocity of the Highland charge that was not uncommon in any large-scale form of warfare in the Highlands. And of course, when clansmen closed they were most renowned for their capacity in close combat, having trained from young ages, having trained from about the age of 10 or so, using the single stick as young lads, towards training their skill and technique. They would, by the time they were teenagers, be skilled enough to wield a steel sword that may well be one that was handed down through the generations as well. And in close quarters combat, the actions were really quite brutal and unforgiving. And in the next slide, we'll see again the Lochtraig sword, and the gory provenance also that goes with it was that it was in fact discovered in 1880 in that cave with the bones of the hand and part of the arm of the original wielder of that sword. It's not the only sword. I've heard of also one other sword that came from Culloden Moor, also with the bones of the finger and the hand still attached and still gripping, after, of course, the flesh had rotted away. And of course, very nearby, just north of the museum, we have the battlefield of Mulroy in 1688, which marks the last clan battle fought in Scotland, the last inter-clan battle that is. But the Lochtraig sword stands as a visceral reminder of that part of our martial culture. If you'd like me to continue and cover the next item, we can do that. That being a very important blade of legend in the West Highland Museum, the first pattern FS fighting knife. And very quickly we'll go to the next, and we'll see that the FS fighting knife gets its name from two gentlemen, William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, who, having their earlier career in the Shanghai police, were recruited to devise the close combat syllabus for what was to become the first commandos and special forces at the start of the Second World War. And Inverloch House was STC-1 Special Training Centre #1, active there in that capacity from June 1940 until February 1942. And on the next slide, we'll see that the training for the commandos moved then to a larger estate that could accommodate greater intake of recruits, that being Achnacarry House, known as Castle Commando in its wartime years. And it was there that the recruits went through the most arduous training, an 8-week course, cut down to 6, eventually for greater numbers going through, where they would take part in excessive amounts of physical training daily, the use of low explosive, high explosives, the training on the rope work course that extended alongside Loch Arkaig. And in the next slide, we'll see, of course, that close combat was a necessary part of that training. And training in arms, in enemy arms, as well as the arms would be expected to use by the way of machine guns, rifles, and small arms with pistols, but also getting even closer and still teaching the techniques that Fairbairn and Sykes taught at Inverloch by way of unarmed combat and the use of the knife. It was the knife that took the commando spirit to close with the enemy. And in the next slide, we'll see that it took them to daring raids such as Operation Chariot, the raid on Saint Nazaire, and throughout all theatres from the hot blazing deserts of Northern Africa to the damper climates in the European theatre, and of course to storming the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. And our final slide will provide us evidence that the FS fighting knife is still in fact carried today operationally in theatre by modern special forces and commandos, and is still proudly worn as the symbol and badge on the arms of commandos that pass the still arduous course today. And they carry it forward still today with the same steely gaze, it can be said, as to the 3 men that stand and still mark the Commando Memorial at Speonbridge today. And that concludes our wee brief on 2 blades of legend from the West Highland Museum. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Paul. Thanks so much. It was really nice that you finished with the Commando Memorial as well, which is just 10 miles north of the museum. Right, so we'll continue with our countdown now. Number 41, here is Rob Roy of cattle rustling fames and also folklore. It's his Sporran Cantle. And coming in at number 40, we have, again, another item belonging to Flora MacDonald. We have her shoe buckles. Oh. And at number 39, we have Prince Charles Edward Stuart's tooth. There's plenty of bits of hair and clothing that belong to Prince Charles in museums dotted around the country and the world, but this is believed to be the only example of a tooth in a collection anywhere. So that's our claim to fame there. Then at number 38, this is an item connected to another object that will be higher up the list. It's a print from a banknote that was printed in 1928 by Sir D.Y. Cameron. At number 37, we have, oh, just coming up there. At number 37, we have a late Bronze Age hanging bowl. And then coming in at number 36, we have a jacket that was supposed to have been worn at the Battle of Culloden. It's come to us again through the Carmichael collection, which Professor Cheap was talking to us about earlier, but it may, the provenance may not be quite right, but Joe Watson's going to be writing a blog for us on that shortly. So watch out on our website for that. Then coming in at number 35, we have a Bronze Age sword. And at number 34 and number 33 respectively, we have prehistoric arrows from Lochaber and a Neolithic stone axe. And Jackie Aitken from Timespan in Helmsdale has kindly agreed to speak to us about these objects. So thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Vanessa. Very lovely to be joining you today from the East Coast. And it's quite cold and snowy here, but I'm nice and warm where I am. It's nice to see the prehistory items represented in your 100 objects. And as a keen archaeologist, and to be honest, I just like going out and about, and I do like to find things. And in the past, quite a lot of these things were just chance finds, and certainly even in the antiquarian times, things were found as people were putting roads through and the railways were going through. So it's just the stories around these items are really interesting when you go back to the old records, and things are being found all the time. It's really important to register that with your local museum and with the treasure trove. But looking at this item here, it's absolutely fascinating. It's been my #1 thing to find, to go out, be part of a field walking expedition or an excavation and find an arrowhead like this. And I haven't yet. So this is as near as I'm going to get to these wonderful items. So these items are wonderful examples. I believe that these are part of a bigger collection that you have at the museum of barbed and tanged flint arrowheads. And the two that you can see on the screen in front of you, the bigger example, I believed, was found at Letterfinlay, and the smaller kind of toffee-coloured flint arrowhead was found in the Fort William area. I believe they were found at different times, and I read that it was maybe part of a field walking exercise that some of these were found. They date back to the Bronze Age, so we're talking quite a long time ago, between 4,000 and 2,500 years ago. So how were these actually made? Well, the material, they're made of flint. And as we know that flint isn't common in Scotland, it is found in Aberdeenshire. And if I walk along the beaches where I am in Brora, I can find flint pebbles that are washed up on the beach. And they're quite rare, but that is another source of finding flint in Scotland. But back in Bronze Age times, it was probably traded throughout the Highlands as well, as a very important and valuable tool-making commodity. So the napper, the person who actually making the arrowhead, would start off with a large core or pebble, or some kind of flint-like hard material, and they would nap flakes off the core. And the napper would select the particular flakes that they would turn into the arrowheads. And this was a very highly skilled making process. And the napper would apply very, it's called pressure flaking technique. You can imagine to take off the tiny little bits of flakes that you need to create the sharp edges and the kind of tooth-like marks along the edges of the arrowhead would take great precision, and the wrong amount of pressure would result in the shattering of the arrowhead, or the arrowhead being broken to such a point it was unusable. So a great technique. If you've watched Time Team and Phil on Time Team, he's definitely an expert napper that I've watched over the years, making flint arrowheads and other tools. And it must have taken several attempts in some occasion to get a usable arrowhead out of the process. The distinctive rectangular shape, as you can see here, there's a very tall example, elongated triangular shape. And there is this central projection at the opposite end of the pointed end. And this is the tang. And this is at the base of the arrowhead. And then the smaller barbs, you can just about see them here. They're the kind of small projecting tooth-like marks, and they are the barbs on each side of the arrowhead. And sometimes it can be the actual sides of the arrowhead may be straight or gently curved towards the center tang. And so these were really quite delicate objects to make, but once they were made, they were very effective weapons. The barbs themselves helped the arrowhead stick into the prey, while the tang helped to keep the arrowhead firmly attached to the shaft of the arrow. And I mean, again, these would have been reused, so they would have been retrieved from the prey and reused again. And they were highly valuable tools. They took a long time to make. And you can imagine that the person who actually made this could be something that they could trade. And certainly it'd be something that the knowledge and the skill to make these arrowheads would be passed down through the generations. Without this skill, this was part of the community's livelihood to be able to make and use these arrowheads. So arrowheads themselves, where are they found? Well, arrowheads are often found in Bronze Age burials as part of grave goods and kiss burials, and sometimes with wrist guards which protected the bowmen, and sometimes they were retouched so that they would be retouched to make them sharp again. And so they have got a use in life, and they also have a use in the afterlife as well. And certainly many of them have been found throughout Scotland when groups have been out field walking. So this is a really lovely example, and I hope I get a chance to actually go and visit these arrowheads at the West Highland Museum myself in the near future. So I think I'll leave it there on the arrowheads, and we'll move on to the next one, Vanessa.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, Jackie. It was interesting. So going to number 32, it's a bit of a mystery object. We think it's a bog oak quern, made from bog oak, but it's still open to interpretation. Oh, there we are, just off beside there. And at number 31, we have a map of the forfeited lands, from the 1745 Rising, and Chris Robinson from the West Highland Museum is going to be talking about those.
That's me unmuted. Okay. Yep, here we have, can you hear me? Jeez.
Yeah, I can hear you, Chris.
Yeah, okay. Fine. Can you see me as well? Yes. Now, yes, we have a map of the part of the forfeited estate of Lochiel, 1772. An impressive map, large map, which sits in the museum. But there's a lot more behind this map than simply the manuscript evidence which is there. After the 45, those who'd been out in the 45, their estates were taken over by the government, in fact, by the Barons of the Exchequer. But the Forfeited Estate Commissioners actually took over the Lochiel estate in about 1770. And a surveyor was sent about to survey the estates, a William Morrison. And this map is the result of his efforts. But there's so much more detail available than is available on this map, in that some years ago, in inquiring of Lochiel, or Lady Lochiel, if she had anything on Dr. Archie, she said, no, I have not, but I've got a wonderful manuscript book which you might like to borrow. And I borrowed it for a weekend, which extended to 6 months by permission. And this manuscript covers all the farms extending from Locharchay right down through Lochiel side, even the estates of Ardshiel. And I copied this, or rather had it transcribed it over a period of time, and found the maps that went with it and put it together in a small local edition, which I've duplicated. This volume isn't just about the maps, it isn't just about the small maps and describing the farms, but it gives us some fascinating general information, how the inhabitants were employed. Chief things was about tending their cattle, their circumstances, means of improvement of their land. There was a cattle market in Fort William twice a year. They talked about the fishings. Fort William employed a vast number of people fishing. There were 30 boats fishing herring from Fort William. They go off in the evening and they return next day. The herring come into the loch on the month of May or June and remain until December. And the time of their coming into the loch is known by the flocks of seafowl or by small whales which follow them in. There's a whole section on colours and dyes about how people coloured their wool, their cloth to make, I'm sure to make tartan apart from anything else, how to make blue colour. They take rock indigo, sew it up in a small bag after being well pounded, and put in a tub near full with water and stale urine, 2/3 of the former and 2/3 of the latter. They rub the indigo bag now and then, and it may be sooner to dissolve in the tub among the yarn. He talks about diseases of animals, black spall, just one moment, snow distemper, and even more interesting to me in connection with my interest in local medicine, diseases of the people, and rheumatism, the cure for rheumatism. They go under a fall of water and remain there till the part affected is numbed and senseless. They then get fat of Solon geese from St. Kilda and anoint the parts with it, which cures a great many. Now, if anybody fancies following this cure, there's plenty of opportunity in the waterfalls of Loch Arbour just at this moment. And I'm sure that Paul could show us some interesting rivers where this cure could certainly be practiced. I'm aware of time. I think I should stop just now. Thank you, Vanessa.
Hi, thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, we are running a wee bit behind. So next up we have at number 30, Jo Watson from the University of the Highlands and Islands, and she's going to be talking about a hard tartan dress from our Carmichael collection.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I just want to go through this very, very quickly, but I'll probably write something for the blog about it because I've quite a lot to say about it. So this is the lovely hard tartan dress, which the museum has dated from the beginning of the 19th century. I think based on the back, which you can't see at the moment, but looking at the design overall, we can sort of think about the 1810s, 1820s. And you can see that there's some wear on there on the dress. So this is something that would have been worn quite frequently. And, oh, there we go. You can have a look inside as well. So you can see that it was originally lined with red, and the arms are lined with, that's a red wool. And also the arms are lined with the red wool. But the inside of the bodice there would have been relined at some later point, probably just because it'd been worn so much and it probably wasn't washed very much at all. And Benbecula at the time, where this dress is from, only had 1,000 inhabitants. There was only one kind of place really of any significance, which was a large house owned by the MacDonald Clanranald. So part of me wonders whether it has anything to do with that house, or possibly maybe was a Sunday best type dress for going to the kirk. Unfortunately, kirk records don't exist from that time, so we can't find out very much about what happened then. But it's an absolutely beautiful example of hard tartan, which would have been woven at home or very locally anyway, near to where it was made. And yeah, it's got a really interesting story, so we'll cover that in a blog for you at some point.
Oh, that was great, Joe. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your reading your blog entries to get further.
There's
And
a couple up already. But
just going quickly, at number 29, we have the Blackthorn stick. At number 28, we have Child's Playset, Clementia. You can get all of these on the website. At number 27, BPC Trues. At number 26, Cluny Snuff Mull. I need to try snuff. Number 25, the Governor's Room from the Fort William Fort. Not strictly an artifact, but nonetheless in there. Number 24, miniatures of Prince Charles Edward Stuart after Robert Strange. And Vanessa?
Yeah, so at number 20, number 23, we have Ian Long's walking stick, and Kenny McIntosh from the West Highland Museum is going to chat to us about that.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you, Kenny.
Yeah. Yes, this walking stick reputedly belonged to Ian Lowm, who is one of the last of the kind of famous Gaelic bards, and he was a bard to the MacDonalds of Keppoch. He lived in the 17th century, and he was present during numerous tumultuous events of that time. There was his most famous appearance was at the Battle of Inverlochy, when the Royalist forces routed the Covenanters in 1645, and he's supposed to have carried this stick with him to the battle. Not entirely sure if that's true, but it does make a good story. The Blackthorn stick, it was carried. It tended to be it could be a walking aid or a weapon, and in the Gaelic world, they had them in Ireland too, and they were known as, probably better known there as the shillelagh. So that's and it's the slow tree, the slow bush actually that the blackthorn comes from, and they're present everywhere in the Highlands. Ian Lowm was a fascinating character. He's credited with actually the engineering Montrose's victory at the Inverlochy by encouraging him to countermarch from Fort Augustus to Inverlochy and surprise the Covenanting army there, and they had a stunning victory over them. He also is credited with avenging what was known as the Keppoch murders, when the young Keppoch chiefs were murdered by some of their clansmen, and he's said to have a petition for justice, and at the end of the day, there were 7 of the murderers were actually caught and beheaded, and he was credited as engineering that. But he was quite a controversial character. He lived right up till just after the Union of Parliament, and sorry, I'm getting that's better. I'm getting feedback. Yep. He lived right up to the Union of Parliament, and I believe he wrote in poems against the Union. But he was quite a controversial character, and he was famous for his very biting biting satire. And he wasn't just the most popular man in Le Havre. In fact, he had to leave the place for a while. But you can still see the ruins of his house up at Lochwagon side, just at Roughburn Dam. And he has got a very fine monument in Killaharrell churchyard. Although it's not actually on his actual grave, it's actually just beside the church door. So the stick itself, the provenance is just probably a wee bit dubious, but the character who's associated this is one of the famous figures in Le Havre, in Bray Le Havre history anyway. Okay.
That's great, Kenny. Thanks so much. Yeah. Sorry about your technical issues there too.
I don't know what. Yeah.
No, it happens to me.
Thank you very much, Kenny. That was great.
Right, so moving along, at number 22, we have a portrait of Clementina Walkinshaw by Alan Ramsey. At number 21, we have a tree root stool used by Prince Charles Edward Stuart. Professor Cheap was going to speak about this. I don't know if you're still going to, because we're running a wee bit behind.
Well, I actually had a suggestion that maybe what we could do at this stage, Vanessa, is we could take the top 20 backwards.
Yeah, of course.
So we've got to 20. So we've come up all the way up to 21, but I think it would be great to spend a little bit of time on number 1. So after Hugh has said his bit, we'll jump straight to number 1, and then come back down the 20.
That's perfect. So it's just a bit mindful that some of the speakers need to get away by 4:30, and we're running a bit behind. So okay. So Hugh, are you able to talk about?
Hello. Yes.
Excellent.
And this is one of these wonderful objects that looks perhaps slightly nondescript and curious and odd altogether, but is absolutely wonderful for everything that it tells us. It's another of the Alexander Carmichael items, and typically was collected in the Hebrides in the last quarter of the 19th century, when he was stationed out there on excise duties. And he had seen it once or twice, and he had asked the owners of this stool, and it was a family from Berneray or Borreray in North Uist who had it, and they were not keen to lose it from the family, and indeed they didn't. Then later on, the owner, the last of the family, so to speak, a Rachel MacDonald or Ronich Nichgoy, came to Lochmaddy and met Alexander Carmichael and gave it to him. And of course, the important thing about it was that it was reputed to have been the stool sat on by Bonnie Prince Charlie as a fugitive in Uist in 1746. And there's no reason at all why this can't be absolutely genuine. And to have little creepy stools, as they called them Scots, or stall or forum in Gaelic, is quite typical, made out of bogwood. And the significant thing is that if you sit on this beside a peat fire, by coming down to a low level close to the floor, your head comes below the mist of peat smoke that hangs in the air within a house, particularly in the winter months. But anyway, this was easy to document in the sense that we know that Bonnie Prince Charlie was in South Uist between let me see, early May and late June for about 2 months. And in fact, it was said that this was on the night before he left Uist for Skye with Flora MacDonald. And it may have been that he was dressed as the famous Betty Burke, dressed as the Irish washerwoman at the time. And that's perhaps for further research. The nice added detail is that there's an account of the stool in the Carmichael Watson papers, and it's available online in the Carmichael Watson collection. And it adds the details, more Gaelic details, which are important, that the stool was compared to a bread toaster. In other words, it was the sort of little piece of furniture set by the peat fire in order to toast the bannocks, and it was known as Farchraal na Friunse, the prince's toaster. In other words, it's really the prince's stool. So there's added details there, and there's lots more to find out about it. But it's a wonderful, curious little object on which so much hangs. Thanks.
Thanks, Hugh. That was really great. It's one of my favourite objects that's in our collection too. So.
What is the number one, Vanessa?
Yep, so at number one, we have voted for by most of our visitors, it got more votes than any other object combined. It's the secret portrait of Prince Charles Edward Stuart. And here to talk about that is Paul Merton from BBC's Grand Tours. Thanks, Paul.
Hello, I forgot I was muted. Yeah, so this is number one. This is what we've all been waiting for. Remarkable object. Well, in fact, it's really two objects, and it was found, I believe, by the founder of the West Highland Museum, Victor Hodgson, in a second-hand shop or a junk shop in London, and he, I'm assuming, knew immediately what it was and why it's so important and so fascinating. It's a portrait in the sense that it's, well, I think the type of painting that this represents is called anamorphic. And that is that it's only really visible and apparent to the human eye when viewed from a particular point or through a particular device. And the particular device in this case is a highly polished piece of glass or a mirror, which when it's located in the middle of the flat surface reveals a portrait. Now the flat surface itself, which is where the painting is, consists of nothing more than a smear of paint, kind of those blues and golds and reds, and they would be completely indecipherable were it not for the fact that once you place this silver mirrored object in the middle and you look very carefully, you can see Bonnie Prince Charlie, or the image of Bonnie Prince Charlie in the mirror. Now, I first saw this a year ago tomorrow when I came up to Fort William on a recce, and then 6 months later, because of COVID, our filming was postponed. We arrived at the museum, and in a socially distanced COVID protocol way with lots of hand sanitizer and masks, we attempted to film with Vanessa this incredible object. Now, interestingly, it was very difficult to capture the image of Bonnie Prince Charlie using the camera. And we've got a very expensive, very sophisticated camera. But the fact that we were trying to kind of focus in on the reflection made Bonnie Prince Charlie perhaps less impressive than he appears on this slide. Because when I got back to the edit and looked at the material that we'd shot, Bonnie Prince Charlie looked very diminutive and sort of slightly coy, sort of peering over the lip of the mirror. But it's an absolutely fascinating object, and you would wonder why it had ever been created in the first place, using the sophisticated technique of anamorphic projection. Now, according to Vanessa, who we interviewed, this secret portrait was deployed as a ruse to get around the prescription of being a Jacobite. Because after the Jacobite rising of 1745, 1746, the collapse of their hopes at the Battle of Culloden, being a Jacobite was obviously tantamount to high treason and therefore punishable by all sorts of horrible means, including death. Now, in order to show your allegiance to who you thought was the true king and the rightful monarch of Scotland and Great Britain, you needed to do that very discreetly and secretly. And this device, this painting on a tray, this kind of smear of paint on a tray, once the viewing device, the mirror, was placed in the middle, enabled you to raise your glass with your Jacobite sympathizing chums, raise the glass and toast the king across the water. And of course, if you were disturbed doing this and you thought that you were being spied upon, you could quickly remove the viewing device, the mirror, and anyone coming into the room would not realize what you had been doing, because you could innocently say you were just sitting around a tray having a glass of wine. Now, this remarkable object, voted as #1 by visitors, I can see why. It's really quite curious in a number of ways. And it seems to be oddly theatrical to me. And a lot of the objects in the Jacobite room have this kind of sense of theatricality about them. And I'm not quite sure when it would have been used, if it was ever used for the purpose we imagine it to be. There seems to be, in the Jacobite room, similar objects with the same kind of sense of frisson of danger. There's the Jacobite fan, for example, which when you kind of open it out, if you're a lady fanning yourself, would reveal your kind of Jacobite sympathies with Jacobite iconography. We also looked, when I was filming there, at a Jacobite snuff box, which has 2 lids. One lid is just an innocent inside of a snuff box, but the other one, if you wanted to show your allegiance to a potential ally, revealed another secret portrait of Bonnie Prince Charlie in the inner lid of the snuff box. Again, a very kind of theatrical thing to do. And I'm just wondering if these objects, kind of like deliciously seditious objects, were ever used at the height of the prescription of the Jacobite movement, or whether people waited until it was perhaps less dangerous to pronounce and proclaim your Jacobite sympathies. An interesting question, but certainly for me, an astonishing object, and a combined object, which also represents a whole style of painting, this anamorphic painting or anamorphic sculpture, kind of, I suppose, that kind of visual trickery that artists have used to disguise and I suppose hide various things which they don't want, or perhaps didn't want the owner to proclaim to a wider public, which is why, interestingly, very close to the secret portrait of Bonnie Prince Charlie, there's a very similar secret portrait, but this time it's a very early example of pornography. And when you place the viewing device, the mirror, in the center, it reveals the form of a naked woman. So this was something that people kind of played around with, this kind of visual trickery. It's absolutely intriguing. And on a final note, if anyone is interested in pursuing this further, they can wait for 4 or 5 weeks' time, and Vanessa will be appearing in one of the episodes of Grand Tours of Scotland's Lochs, which I think is going to be transmitted on the 24th of March. So she will be there explaining in much greater detail and much greater clarity than I have done what it's all about and why it was created in the first place. But thanks very much.
That's fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today. And also, we also have a podcast about the secret portrait on the Highland Objects website as well, which is Chris Robinson is talking about it on there. So Alan, did you want to continue with the countdown?
I think we should. I mean, I'm. What is number 2, Vanessa?
Number 2, again, it's Jacobite. It's a Jacobite glass from our collection. Very popular again with the visitors. And number 3 is the strange plate. I was going to talk about that, but since we're running so far behind, I think I'll skip that. But there are blogs about the strange plate on our website in December 2020, along with another Jacobite series. And we also have, again, I've done a podcast on the Highland Objects website as well, so you can find out about the strange plate there. And going down to number 4, we have the secret portrait snuff mull of Prince Charles Edward Stuart, and Paul's already spoken about that just now.
Oh, it's a very clear portrait, that, isn't it? There of.
It's beautiful. I mean, if Ian can go to another picture, that's actually a hidden lid. So you'll see that basically there's a lid there that hides the portrait on top, and then you can show it to people that support the Jacobites or otherwise hide it. So yeah, we purchased that in 2018 with the help of the Art Fund and the National Fund for Acquisitions in Edinburgh. So we're really pleased with that.
And I really want to hear about the background to the Fairbairn Sites Commando fighting.
We already have. Paul.
Oh, have we?
Yeah.
Oh, we've had that one already. Okay, got you.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was about to say. Paul
I remember
McDonald Armories, during his presentation, he covered the Commando fighting knife. So
but that's a very nice photograph of it. I think, yeah, that's very good.
But I mean, that's like an iconic knife, and again, it's really dear to our collection. That came into the collection probably about 10 years ago now. Yep, so at number 6, we're going to our next speaker. This is a 17th century prayer book that belonged to Flora MacDonald's mother. In fact, that's not the picture, sorry. I think that one must have got in there by mistake. That's actually from the Gaelic Dictionary. Yep, there we are. And right, so I'd just like to introduce Dr. Chelsea Retke from the University of St Andrews. So welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I'm very excited to talk for a few minutes about this prayer book. So it is actually a Roman Catholic Latin prayer book, which was very popular before the Reformation. And it translates to Little Office of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now, what's really interesting about the fact that this is a Catholic prayer book is that Flora MacDonald, her family was Presbyterian, although of course there were many Catholic MacDonalds. And this reminds us that often families will collect books from across the religious spectrum. So this book was printed in Saint-Omer in 1672 by Joachim Carlier, and Saint-Omer was a very important headquarter for exiled Catholic populations, especially from England, but also from Scotland. There was a Jesuit college there where many exiles went for their education, and it's also where a lot of books were produced. And that's because at the time this book was made, it was illegal to print Catholic books in Scotland. So that meant if you needed a book, it would have been purchased abroad and then smuggled back into the country. So this could have been done by the purchaser or by missionary priests who were entering the country, or even by some very savvy merchants who understood the value of black market items. In fact, Catholic books had such an impact and were so worried about in Scotland that the printing and selling of Catholic books made its way into the 1689 Claim of Right, the parliamentary act that deposed James VII from the throne and kind of kicked off our Jacobite cause. So the very early origin of this book is so fascinating and so tied in to that Jacobite theme that we've been talking about so much today. So the book was used by Flora, and it has some lovely marginalia in it. It was very common for people to write in books. And it also has a fabulous binding. So it's this intricate woven colored straw. And this is actually really rare as a type of binding. And usually when you see this type of straw binding, it's from Napoleonic prisoners of war. So there's further mystery lying with this book. So really, when you get a chance, recommend going and seeing it in person. And that's what I have to say about the book.
Thank you, Chelsea. That was lovely. Yeah, it is a beautiful book. If you go to the gallery as well, we actually have one of our directors who reads Latin. There's an audio recording of her reading from the book too, which is really interesting. Right, so continuing with our countdown, did you want to proceed, Alan?
Yeah, I think it would be great to hear what Hugh has to say upon the fairy pipes of Mordart. Presumably you're correct on pronunciation, amongst other things.
It's Moidart.
Yes, hello. These are a famous object, certainly in the world of piping. Having played pipes all my life, I'm very interested in this instrument. It's a curiosity in a way. It's not immediately like a Highland bagpipe as you might expect, but the basic components are there of the chanter on which you play the tunes, and a drone and a blowpipe and a bag for the air. It's got a little silver plate on it, which says that it latterly belonged to the MacDonalds of Kinloch Moidart, and it had been given to them by the famous McIntyre pipers, and that it had been played at, wait for it, the Battle of Bannockburn, 1314. This is amazing, and I won't go into this in any other detail, but to say that it would spoil the story to be too analytical about them, but they are said to be an enchanted instrument that the McIntyre owners, one who first owned them, presumably at the time of the Battle of Bannockburn, he had a dream in which a fairy came to him and offered him the supreme skill of playing the bagpipes. And he, in accepting this, she had instructed him to bore an extra hole in the chanter, in other words, to augment the sound somehow. And he did this, and this created an enchanted instrument. And it was enchanted to the extent that these pipes, if they were ever played in battle, the side on which for which they were played, they would never lose the battle. So that is the background to them. And they are on long loan to the museum, but they were in the house of Kinloch Moidart on the west coast of Loch Harbour, and they had been left with the MacDonalds of Kinloch Moidart by the McIntyre pipers, who, after generations and generations of playing the pipes and being traditional hereditary musicians in the West Highlands, emigrated to North America and left the pipes here so that they would never leave the Highlands to which they belonged. So they are a magnificent little set of pipes, and well worth going to see. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Yeah, they're a really great asset to the museum. I should point out as well, they're actually in our care. They are on loan to the museum, but we do treasure them. Right, so counting down next, at number 8, we have a Jacobite fan. These were issued to the ladies at the Holyrood Ball in 1745. And then at number 9, we have our next speaker. And this is a beetle wing dress. And Jo Watson from the University of the Highlands and Islands has a short PowerPoint presentation focusing on this object. So thank you, Jo.
Okay, can we go through to the next slide, please? Oh gosh, you're going to have to go through quite a few slides to get to the beetle wing dress. There we go. And the next one, please. Thank you. So when I tell people that I'm studying a dress embroidered with beetle, embellished with beetle wings, they get quite shocked. Why would you put wings from an insect on a dress? So I thought I'd just very briefly tell you about the insect. So this is the electron beetle. Lives in Thailand, China, India. And as you can see, they've got very, very ornate green wings. That's the hard outer case, and actually they fall off quite naturally. So beetles aren't harmed in the making of these dresses. And they've got a life cycle of about 3 months. Next slide, please. So this is the dress that was in the collection of the museum. And this is some photography that was taken, gosh, was it June, July last year, Vanessa? And looking absolutely resplendent. And I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the person who commissioned this dress and what I've been able to find out about her. So next slide. Yeah, very briefly, this is a sort of crinoline that would have been worn under this dress. The bottom of the dress, so the circumference at the bottom is 130 inches, so it's really quite broad. So, you know, it would have been really poofy. So the crinoline that I've made for the museum only has a circumference of 80 inches because we couldn't put it in the space. But this is kind of gives you an idea of how big the skirt would have been. Next slide, please. So this is the information. So the dress arrived in a package with a shawl to the museum in 1993 with an accompanying letter. It was saying that it was worn by the donors, I think she was a great-great-grandmother, Barbara Morrison, that she was born in Inverness in 1828, that her father was a gardener for an earl, don't know what that had anything to do with it, that she met her husband in Jersey and he was there with the army, the British Army. She then went with her husband, who was in the British Army, to India, and they went aboard the SS Himalaya, and the dress was made in India for Barbara to wear at a social function. Now, during lockdown, Vanessa gave me this information, and I wanted to know more about the person, as well as much as I could about the dress. So I used some genealogical websites, and I also used the British Newspaper Archive, which is an absolutely amazing resource that everybody can sign up to. It's wonderful, the amount of information you can find on there. And I've had quite a good fun actually reading a newspaper called the Homeward Mail from China and India, and it's given me quite a lot of information. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this lady's life and why this dress from India is in the West Highland Museum. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so as I've just said, I wanted to find out about Barbara herself. So I went on Find My Past and found a load of records for her. So not found her birth record or anything to do with her baptism in 1828, but looking at census records later on, it gives the place of birth as Inverness and the year of birth as 1828. So we know that she was born in 1828. In 1841, at the age of 13, not at the age of 15, as stated on the census records, she was working as a farm servant at Broadford. So if anybody knows Broadford on Skye, not too far from where the co-op is now. So she was working there as a farm servant. She next appeared on the 1851 census as a dressmaker in Glasgow, working for, I think it was her sister's husband. Yeah, it was her sister's husband. So she was working as a dressmaker. And then she next turns up, no marriage certificate, but she next turns up in Jersey in 1853, married to a French-speaking tailor from Jersey. So I kind of wonder whether they met somehow through her being a dressmaker and him being a tailor. And she has several children with him and lives in Jersey. And then, unfortunately, he dies of pneumonia in 1856. A month later, she marries William Fitzhenry from the British Army by special licence, and with him, they go off to India. So it's quite a remarkable journey. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So this is a map showing her travels. So she goes from Inverness to Broadford, then down to Glasgow, then down to Jersey, then back up to Winchester where the 60th Rifles are based. And then with them goes all the way around to Madras, so Chennai. The journey takes about 3 months, and I found from the British Newspaper Archive that they sailed in 1867, November 1867. And the most remarkable thing about this journey is she had a 1-month-old baby with her at the time. Her other children had been put in a boarding school, but I can't imagine doing that journey aboard even if the SS Himalaya was very nice, and doing that journey with a 1-month-old baby, it would have been absolutely horrendous. So she lands in Madras in Chennai, and they're there for a little while, and William is then stationed at Bellary. So I actually do have a photograph from the year that he moved to Bellary, which I'll show you in a moment. It's very, very different from Skye, very, very different from Inverness. It's extremely hot. It's right in the centre of India, and must have been a complete culture shock. Now, the letter told us that she had this dress commissioned and made for her for a social function. I haven't yet found out which social function. I think I'm going to have to go to the India Office archive in London when things open up again to find out some more information. But I think the event took place in 1870 in Bellary for a visit of Lord Napier. It kind of makes sense that it would be that kind of level of person visiting. And they then returned back to England in 1872, and unfortunately she dies of breast cancer in 1877. I think it's wonderful that this dress has ended up at the West Highland Museum. I kind of feel that it just brings the whole sort of circle of the story back to where it should be. And it just shows how mobile Scots were in the 19th century, especially when involved with the army. It's such an unusual find to have at the West Highland item to have at the West Highland Museum, and obviously worthy of a lot more study, which will be happening. So I think that's all I have to say. Very happy to answer questions because I could talk about it. Yes, Napier is in the Napier Commission. Yeah. So I could talk about this all day long. So please feel free to send me some messages or go to my Facebook page where I'll be blabbering about it for months on end probably. Yeah, very, very special dress. We're very honoured to have it. I'm very proud to have studied it. So thank you.
Thanks, Jo. That was really great. Yeah, we'd be really interested to find out why the donors chose for it to come here, because it was donated from a family that were residing in England when it came to us in the 1990s. But as Jo found out during her research, sadly, the lady that donated it to us passed away late last year. So yeah, so thanks very much.
Can I just say something very quickly about this photo? Sorry. So in my research, I got in touch with the 60th Rifles and found out that her husband, William, was a quartermaster. So he had started in the army. He was from Dublin, and he'd been a naughty boy as a teenager, and he had been in the naughty school, as it were. Joined the army at 16 and fought in South Africa in 1853 and 1854, for which he was awarded a bravery medal. And he moves up the ranks in the army, and he became a quartermaster shortly before he met Barbara. He is one of those two men in this photo, one of the two men seated in this photo. I don't know which one yet. I like to think it's the guy on the right with the pom-pom on top of his hat, because I think he's quite dashing. But yeah, so we haven't got a photo of her, but we do have a photo of him. So I just kind of think I quite like that part of the story, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great. The research that you've been doing is amazing. I should also point out that we're also working in collaboration with the Museums and Heritage Highlands, and there's going to be a textile exhibition called Highland Threads, where each museum within the Highlands is going to be showcasing objects from their collection, and the beetle wing dress is the chosen textile that we've decided to submit to that. So you can find out more about that exhibition.
Should be getting a bigger crinoline as well for that.
Yes, yeah. Right, so Alan, did you want to continue with the countdown?
Yeah, I think that would be great. But whilst we've been having this, I think you were taking some photographs of a powder horn that we saw earlier on, and I think that it has emerged as a 3D model. So I think maybe we could have a look at that. After Beth, I think is speaking about the St Kilda mailboat. So maybe we could do Beth and then have a wee look at the 3D model of the powder horn.
Yeah, of course. The St Kilda mailboat. Well, first of all, at number 10, we have the Golden Eagle. This was really popular, especially with children. It's been on display in our Natural History Gallery for a while, and it was from Glencoe originally. Right. So, and then moving on now to number 11, we have the St Kilda mailboat. And Dr. Bess Rhodes from the University of St Andrews is going to focus. Oh no, that's the Montrose helmet. So yeah, back one. Yeah, so Dr. Bess Rhodes from the University of St Andrews is going to focus on this object for us. So thank you, Bess.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Well, the islands of St Kilda are one of the most remote places in the British Isles, being about 40 miles west of North Uist in the Atlantic. And the main island of Herta had a population of around 80 in the late 19th century. Life on St Kilda was hard then. For much of the 19th century, about 2/3 of the babies born on St Kilda died of tetanus. And the islanders supported themselves through a mix of farming and hunting the numerous seabirds on the islands. It was a unique way of life, but the community was still connected to the wider world. Boats called at the island, and during the 19th and early 20th centuries, a number of St Kildans emigrated overseas. And the object you see here, the St Kilda mailboat, is a symbol of that mix of isolation and of interaction which characterised life on St Kilda. So what the mailboat was, it was a float which could be made of a range of materials, sometimes an inflated bladder, sometimes lots of other different types of material. And the float was attached to a waterproof receptacle for holding letters. And the mailboat would be cast into the water in the hope that it would wash up on the coast and that whoever found it would send the letters on. And in 1885, after a particularly bad harvest, when the St Kildans were facing starvation, they actually successfully used a float like this to appeal for help, and it washed up on Harris, and supplies were sent to St Kilda. Now, the St Kildas eventually abandoned Herta in 1930, and this mailboat probably came to the museum's collection not long after. It's recorded as being in the museum's collection in 1938. Unfortunately, the receptacle for protecting the letter later went missing, and you see here a replica. However, the float is the original. So it's something which once carried a message through the waters of the Atlantic from the people of St Kilda. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Bess. That was great. And sorry for just jumping around a little bit here, but I think, Perrin, you had something that you had an object you were wanting to talk about before. Soon, as in now. Hi, Perrin.
Yeah, if you want to go straight to that, that's totally fine. This is number 14, the Sobieski brothers kilt. So this is a really fascinating object with a really interesting story behind it, which I won't have time to get into here, but it's definitely something to look at later on. And this is something that is deeply connected with something that I think many people around the world associate with Scotland, which is kind of the idea of clan tartans, and tells us a bit about where that idea originated. So This is made by two brothers called the Sobieski brothers. And they were actually born in Wales to English parents at the turn of the 19th century. And they were named John Carter Allen and Charles Manning Allen, so not Sobieski. But by the 1820s, they had set themselves up as scholars of Highland dress, weaponry, and Gallic culture. And they claimed to be the long-lost grandsons of Prince Charles Edward Stuart, so Bonnie Prince Charlie, who you heard about earlier in this discussion. And they were calling themselves now John Sobieski Stolberg Stuart and Charles Edward Stuart. And they were using this fabricated ancestry and supposed expertise in the field of Highland history to advise members of Scottish clans on what their clan tartans should be. And it's important to note here that the idea of clan tartans was born really in sort of the late 18th and early 19th century. So this was not a previous idea. And it particularly kicked off in advance of King George IV's royal visit to Edinburgh in 1822, when everyone, including lowlanders in Edinburgh, were instructed by Sir Walter Scott and the other organizers of the main events to dress in traditional Highland styles. So all of these people, many of whom had probably never dressed in Highland styles before, let alone in Highland styles appropriate for a royal visit, had to figure out what that meant. And there were long-standing traditions of sort of matching sets of clothing called liveries used by aristocratic families and their retainers. And of course, army regiments, including the famous Highland regiments, used identifiable uniforms and colors. So it's perhaps not surprising that people assumed that non-military representatives of the Highland clans should also be dressed in identifiable colors or patterns for this royal visit. And there had been various regionally favored tartan patterns before, and tartan patterns were certainly recorded and preserved and used again and again. But these were normally patterns and colors that were sort of often used by weavers in a particular area, but that changed over time and were not linked with a particular clan or family. So the idea that each clan should have a set of identifiable exclusive tartans was new. And in the decades after these events, the Sobieski brothers took this idea and really ran with it. And they were actually the designers and inventors of many new sort of old and true clan tartans. And lots of their designs have actually survived and are still in use today. And now these have developed as an important tradition of their own. And this particular kilt is made of hard tartan in the Duke of Rothesay pattern. It's actually the earliest surviving example of that particular pattern, which appeared in 1842. And it's also quite an early example of a sewn box pleated kilt. So this garment really represents the beginning or very early stages of a number of different ideas and traditions that are now associated with Highland culture. And as I say, that have developed ideas and traditions of their own extending through to today. So this is a really fascinating object. I do actually have to go teach now, but if anyone has questions for me, I actually run the Open Virtual World social media. So please do feel free to get in touch at a later date, and I'd love to discuss things with you. So thank you very much.
That's fantastic, Perrin. Thanks so much. I'm sorry if we've made you a bit late for your class.
No, thank you.
That's super. Yeah, I've been messing with the order, so
no, that's absolutely fine. I realised
the rebelling. Sorry.
Sorry, I realised Perrin needed to get away.
Yeah.
I think there's a few people keen to hear about the Montrose helmet, which came in at number 12 on the list.
I did notice that there was a rebellion in the ranks when there was fear that we were skipping it, but we had no intention of doing that.
No, exactly. So Dr. Chris Robinson from the West Highland Museum was going to focus on this object for us. So Chris, are you there?
Thank you, Vanessa. Yes, Montrose's helmet, definitely. We've labelled it as a trooping helmet belonging to the Marquis of Montrose, James Graham, and that's how it was received in the museum in 1953. But looking at it more objectively, it's described as a continental armoured Pappenheimer helmet of the 17th century, possibly Dutch, but could equally be German or Polish. The Pappenheimer style featured an adjustable nose guard and a visor to the front. This sort of helmet was developed from a precursor of Turkish origin. It was widely used during the 30 Years' War on the continent and during the English Civil War, and commonly known in Germany as a Zishagger, or a horseman's pot. Nowadays, known as a lobster tail pot. It has a neck protector at the back, as you can see, which is hinged. Worn by typical cavalrymen of the day, with body armor as well. Used by the cavalry on both sides in the English Civil War, including Oliver Cromwell's side, as well as the Royalist side. Generally thought that the Royalists had fancy headwear all the time, lots of flowing feathers and things, but far from the case. The surviving order from Charles I himself ordered 33 pots, along with other cavalry armor, for the use of his own troop of horses in 1642. Perhaps he sent one up to James Graham. Did it belong to James Graham, Duke of Montrose? Well, that's a big question. Certainly, there are pictures, lots of pictures of the Duke of Montrose in heavy ornate armor of the finest quality, none of him with a helmet that I'm aware of. And this helmet, sorry to say, is not of the same sort of quality or the same speciality as that of the rest of his armor. But really, who knows? After Montrose was hung, drawn, and quartered, his body parts were sent far and wide, scattered far and wide. In fact, in a book in 1909 concerning the Scots Army, there was a picture of his forearm, which was still in private hands in 1909 at the time of the book's production. Those of his body parts, presumably less his arm, were gathered together, however, in 1661 when he was buried at St. Giles. The helmet was donated to the West Highland Museum by one Charles Alder in 1953. We have correspondence at that time to Edith McGregor from a Mary Louise McDonnell Thornton, who knew Charles Alder, who I imagine had died. She'd known him for years, and he claimed to have origins from the Glengarry stock, and he therefore collected anything with any vague connection. He insisted that he'd seen a handwritten note, which insisted that it was acquired from Lord Archibald Campbell at the beginning of 1898. Now, Lord Archibald Campbell was an antiquarian and a collector. He wrote a book, Records of Argyll, a sumptuous large volume. I found no evidence of reference to this helmet there. But we do have a reference to a statutory declaration made by Louis Charles de Bourbon, who was a commissioner for oaths in 1939. And this evidence is held in Lloyd's Bank in Threadneedle Street and was seen by me in 1953. So really, who knows? But it's a fine piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So next up at number 13, as we're going the opposite direction now, we have the Corran Beaker, and Jackie Aiken from Timespan in Helmsdale is going to be talking to us about this.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yes, what a lovely item this is. I'm from Brora, so we've got a natural Jurassic clay deposit down on our beach here, and I've actually made pots from it myself, not very successfully, I have to say, but it's interesting trying to make pots from natural clay. So the Corran pot, so this is a beaker pot, an urn, and it's a hand decorated clay pot known as a beaker, and it dates back to the early Bronze Age, around 4,000 years ago. It was found in association with a burial kist in a gravel knoll and above the Nether Lochaber Hotel, Corran Ferry near Fort William, in 1889. It was a chance find by the local innkeeper who was moving some gravel. And there was no other skeleton or bones in the kist, but there was one other item of grave goods, which was a flint striker light. And it was in the possession of the MacLean of Ardor family until it was gifted to the museum in 1990. It's not very big. This is kind of funny when you're looking at it on the screen. I was quite surprised. It's only 10 centimeters tall and 5 centimeters wide. So it's actually quite a small pot in itself, beautiful as it is. So how is the pot made? So it's made of natural clay. It's been fired. It's got small pebble inclusions, and its shape is very characteristic of beaker pots, with the averted lip, the bulging sides, and this example is decorated from the lip right down to the base. And it's got these wonderful bands of horizontal, vertical and oblique parallel lines with intercrossing zigzags. The lines themselves, when you actually can see them in detail, have been made actually by, they've been made of little dots, and it looks like a comb-like tool has been applied or something that has created the lines by dotting them like a dot to dot. So a lot of time and thought has gone into the decoration of this pot. So when it was found, it was the only kist of this nature, this beaker culture found in the district of Lochaber. I don't know, but I'd be very curious to find out how many other kist burials from this beaker type have been found. Has any more been found in the Lochaber area to compare to this one? And we can only conjecture as to its use. It was obviously placed in the burial, the kist burial, so it could have contained some kind of drink or some kind of liquid foodstuff that the dead person would take. Again, that idea, a ritualistic offering with the burial. And it also goes to that time of thinking about this beaker culture, these new people that arrive in Britain. From what we believe, the beaker culture came from Spain and Portugal into Central Europe, eventually coming to Britain and then making its way through Scotland and the Highlands as well. What was really interesting, I thought, was quite I'm amazed that it's in one piece, because when the excavator, a Donald Campbell, found the pot, he straight away thought that when it was exposed to the air that it would collapse or it would disintegrate. So the first thing he did with a naturally fired clay pot was he submerged it in water, and the pot, from what I have read, fell apart. So when it was obviously put back together again. I hope I've got the right pot, but that's what it said of this pot. But from what I can see on the screen, it's been put back together rather well. So there is one thing to learn, to take away from this. Do not put your beaker pots in water if you do find any in anywhere. So I think I'll leave it there. It's a beautiful pot. I'm sure there's lots more local stories about it, but it is fascinating. And what a beautiful art and culture, and what a legacy it's left for us behind. And it's just been nice to be part of the 100 Objects. So thank you, West Highland Museum, and Open Virtual Worlds for inviting me to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. That's great. Yes, you're right. It was extensively reconstructed. It was actually repaired with plaster of Paris back in the 19th century when it was found. But okay, so I think we're moving on to our final countdown now. going from 15 to 20, and then we'll have our last speaker at number 20. No, sorry, at number 19. Coming in at number 15, we have Prince Charles Edward Stuart's waistcoat. And at number 16, again, sticking with the Prince Charles Edward Stuart theme, we have his desk mask. Sorry, I'm going too far ahead, Ian. So this is the waistcoat that belonged to Prince Charles Edward Stuart. That's a treasured part of our collection. It belonged to his doctor. And then moving on, we have a copy of the death mask of Prince Charles Edward Stuart. And at number 17, we have a birching table. And at number 18, we have some Bronze Age gold penannular armlets. These are Irish, but they were found on the West Coast. And they're actually on loan to us from Donald Cameron of Lochiel. And then at number 19, we have a prayer book from the Culloden battlefield that was gifted to us a couple of years ago. And Dr. Chelsea Recke is going to talk to us about this object. So thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you so much. And wow, I'm very honored to be closing out the 100 objects. So we have once more circled back to the Battle of Culloden and another prayer book. So this time it's a manual for a Christian, and it is in English, whereas the last one was in Latin. These types of manuals were very common and meant to help guide the layperson through their daily lives, offering prayers for different occasions. And if you're able to see on this page, there's a couple of examples of those prayers. So unfortunately, this specific book was rebound in the 19th century, at which time we lost the imprint or publication information. But it does have some similarities to Erasmus's Manual for a Christian Soldier or Manual for a Christian Knight, which would actually have some relevance to this book's history. So as said, it was gifted on the battlefield of Culloden, and it was from Prince Charles Edward Stuart, and it was given to a soldier named Captain James MacDonald of Glengarry. And according to later testimony, Captain MacDonald was only 16 years old at the time. So it gives you an idea of just who was participating in this fight. And we know this information from this lovely 19th century inscription on the book that continues to talk about the provenance history of it. And the book was passed down through the family, with each generation documenting the provenance. And this was very common. Again, when you have these special books, it's very useful to write information in them. You know that it's going to be passed through the generations. And it was then gifted to the museum in 2018 by a descendant of that captain. So we have a really rare straight line of gifting and provenance, which often doesn't happen. And it's also a great reminder that just like now, books have always made great gifts and very significant gifts. So if you're trying to think of what to do for Father's Day, always a good choice. And as with the other prayer book, there are recordings on the website of prayers from this book as well. Thank you so much. That's the last object.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. That's brilliant. We do have one, well, number 20, we were just mentioned the Glenfinnan stone. And this is the final object, but nobody will be speaking about this. And again, this is in our care and is supposed to be the stone where Prince Charles Edward Stuart raised his standard at Glenfinnan in 1745.
There are, though, two surprises which have rolled up whilst we were doing the show, so to speak. So I think Neil has done a virtual tour. So all the people saying, "Oh, we can't wait to visit." There might be a little opportunity to visit now to see the 360 images. And I think Catherine and yourself cooperated together to make a powder horn digital model. And I think that's ready to see as well. So we could maybe just round off with those. Oh, here we go.
Excellent.
That's amazing.
So, and that's I think you did that on Wednesday or last week, was it on Thursday or something?
Last
Yeah.
Thursday, using some photos that Neil had took previously, and then Vanessa and I set up a webinar to go through the photogrammetry process, and started with this powder horn and just finished it up. Busy little bee over here during the webinar here. So powder horn, yeah, so still could use some work, but was trying to get it ready for today. So
well done.
My first attempt. So,
but it can be done virtually. This is all, you know, we're doing this all, you know, normally I would come up and we would set up and we would do photogrammetry in situ in the museum, but with COVID restrictions, you know, we're seeing how far we can get with teaching and doing it live as well. And so obviously you can do it. It can be taught and done.
Yeah, that came out of your phone, Vanessa, I believe.
Yeah, it's just a Samsung Galaxy A71 phone.
And not the easiest object either, but a really cool one, just because it is a bit shiny. So there are, and that's the beauty of this project that we're doing right now, is that it really is all about accessibility in situations like now, where all these 100 objects are picked are digitized, are continuing to be digitized, and some of them digitized in new ways, such as 3D. So then it can reach the most people and can be accessed by everyone, as opposed to anyone who would normally just be walking through the museum. So yeah, it's really fun to be able to be doing this project. I wish I could come up to the museum, and hopefully I will be, but we can do it remotely from now.
So maybe we could, Neil, you've been doing some gallery stuff.
Yes, I've been getting together some bits and pieces of 3D images was the start of it all. And then one of the things which I've been also working on is some 360 degree pictures here, which you can drag around. So if anybody, right at the start, we were talking about people from America, Canada, and even Glenfarg. If you can't make it up to here, we're trying to get together some pictures here of the Jacobite room, which Paul Merton was talking about earlier on, and to which Peter MacDonald was talking right at the start of the day about the bright red Jacobite room. Well, this is what we have now here. And just going around here, we can see bits and pieces. This is just a quick attempt. These are about 5 or 6 pictures put together for that one image. And then if, Ian, if you could click to the next one, the portrait, the beauty about this is that we can then, as you can see, we can put up points of interest for people visiting the area. The idea behind this became from the Rijksmuseum did something similar, so that people who can't come and see it but want to find out about it and get a feel for the museum, they can go into these little bits of pictures as well and give us some more information. And then Ian, if you want to go to the next one, down there, he is in control. And here is one here, just you can't get some accurate pictures like the mask here, but if you click on the eye there, that will bring us up to a picture of the mask, and also a closer picture of the mask with some information for people to look at. And then if you want to close that one down in, that would be great. And then just go the other way. He's on a mission. Well, there's some of the wonderful Jacobite glasses we have. And here's, I think, the most recent acquisition, which we have here, the D.Y. Cameron painting on the right-hand side here, which is the next slide, which you want to click onto. Just give us a quick one. And there you go, some more information there if you want it. And finally, you don't need to click on that one. I think we get the feel. Oh, it's off, right? And that's giving a wee bit of information about the painting itself. And then finally, if we go to the last picture, this is to say there are certainly far more bits and pieces that we can show, but that was just a brief introduction as to what you can do with a virtual tour for people who are unable to visit the area. And thank you very much indeed for getting that up so quickly. I only handed it on at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, so thank you for that. And thank you also, can I just say to everybody, I may be going ahead with things, but all the people were saying what a great day. So thank you, Vanessa, Alan, and the team for just getting this together. It's been absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Neil, and thank
Here.
you for rounding it off. I think we're probably drawing to a close, are we not? Are we not, Vanessa? I mean,
yeah, unless anyone, I think there were a couple of questions in the gallery. Sorry, in the quick Q&A. There's one, I think, for Hugh Dan. I don't know if you've seen it. Thank you, Hugh Dan. Do we know if it was ever played with and what club? I'm assuming he's talking about the shinty stick. And thank you for sending me the link. And that's from Johnny McFarlane.
Yeah, well, the short answer is, if you look at it, I don't think it's ever been played for. Now would not be the time to start either. I think it would have been done as sample for the illustration for the book, is my gut feeling, that he would have commissioned it from a local craftsman to show how the sticks were made and what the best kind of stick looked like, and to contrast it with, that was the two-handed version. Then there was a separate shorter stick which was one-handed, and in the book he's got the two positioned together with a ball in between to show the difference. So I think he commissioned it, wouldn't surprise me. And then it's just been kept in pristine condition. I mean, even the handle is just wonderful.
Right. And the next question.
I wouldn't give it to Kenny McIntosh, put it that way.
Oh, I'll bear that in mind. The next one's from Eric McIntyre, and he wants to know who gave the Appin gun to the museum. I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know. Chris, do you know?
No, I don't know. But what I can say is that there is a contender which is held locally, which has been promised to the museum. So we may find the genuine one within a few months. We shall see.
Yeah, but Eric, if you'd like to, I can post up on our Facebook page once it'll be easy enough for me to check the collections management system, and we can get that information to you. And the next question is from Lynn. Oh, sorry.
Just to add that there's one or two other contenders for the Appin murder gun. So any other candidates for that would be very welcome and worth seeing. It's a very interesting story.
Yes, yeah, it is indeed, Hugh. Sorry. The next question is from Lynn Campbell. She wants to know how many death masks of Prince Charles Edward Stuart were made. Ours makes 3 that we know of. I know there's one at Inverness Museum and Culloden. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I know a man who does. There was a forensic artist called Hugh Morrison who reconstructed Prince Charles's death mask using all of the death masks that he could lay his hands on. So if you Google that, you'll be able to locate him, and perhaps he'll be able to tell you, unless anyone else knows the answer to that one.
I've got a feeling it might be a dozen, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Oh yeah, Chris?
Yes, can I just make a small contribution concerning the beaker? Purely by chance, I was up at the site of the discovery of that beaker last Sunday, and in fact, that was found in 1895. Another one was found in recent living memory, possibly the 1930s, and there are now 2 kists which you can see. They're still intact, clearly with no beakers in, but there is a feeling that there may well be more on what is a very prominent site at Corran Ferry. There were at least 3 other kists in North Ballachulish as well. My feeling is that the whole area running from Corran through to the Ballachulish Ferry was a very fertile area in Neolithic times. We have the Ballachulish goddess, we have a flint factory, and I'm sure there's more to be discovered. Thanks.
You can see that.
Hello?
Another question, which is regarding the red walls in the Jacobite room. Why is red an important colour in Gaelic culture?
Hugh?
Oh, well, if put on the spot, I would say that red is a very important colour from all points of view, and it was most early tartans were always red. It was a more expensive color, a more prestigious color, and I think it's highly appropriate that the Jacobite room is painted red, and much to be welcomed.
We lost you there, Hugh.
That's great, thank you. So from the panelists, is there anybody who else who would like to, you know, make a final observation or comment?
Well, Alan, as the chairman, I would like to thank everybody who's contributed today. And I include all the unbelievable number of people who actually kept on right through and enjoyed this with us. But I particularly would like to thank you, Alan, and Vanessa, and the team at St Andrews for all your work in pulling this together. So I'm sure we all agree as participants in this that we're all very grateful for that. So thank you very much from the museum.
Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to work with you, and I don't think you can really describe it as work. It's just been play, and the thing that really struck me is just how easy everything was, and I think that reflects the scale of interest and audience that there is for the heritage that you're custodians of. So yeah, thank you very much for letting us play with you.
You're welcome. Well, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Great afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, Colin.
Thank you.